Greetings all, and welcome to another Wu-Sabat Outformation class UK. Hara Habab, if you could just do me a favour please, the whiteboard, if you can just convert that to a co-host for me please.
That's done.
Much appreciated, thank you. Yeah, apologies for the late start, just waiting for a few more people to come on, but we'll have to crack on now and get started. So thank you for your patience and thank you for bearing with us with the adjustment of dates this month. We should return back to our normal schedule in the month of November. So what that effectively means is you've got a class this week, there'll be one next week, and then the week after that, there'll be a class again to get us back into our normal schedule. Just had to adjust a number of things just for this month only. So it's Black History Month in the UK. That's not necessarily that for the rest of the world. I don't know if that's a positive or a good thing, because we have Black History Month where we're celebrating all this positive energy. And then at the end of October, it's Halloween. So I don't know who the joke's on, us or us. It seems to be, isn't it? Another hoodwink situation, isn't it? For those of us who came from those neighborhoods. Now, okay, so as I say, Wu-Sabat Outformation class. What we're doing today is I did at the last session, so that was natural law and the concept of true justice, part 2. We did say we would just finish off the doctrines, 9 doctrines of Tahuti, and then just finish off sort of going to the ethics and the maxims of Yaanuwn. I'm not going to go into that in loads of detail, so we're just going to cover off that for today and then go into the maxims just to cover off that class and then step into natural ether energy. So if you've joined for natural ether energy, we are doing that today. But we made a commitment just to finish off some aspects of this class. And actually, what's quite interesting is that the two kind of merge nicely in together. So we will revisit, although we may not cover it in loads of detail today, we will revisit some of those 9 doctrines in more detail when we cover off part 2 of the natural ether energy class. And if we do need to go into it a bit further, then we will do so by using maybe an additional part on the schedule, because it is, I think of most who may have read that book, and certainly some of the feedback that I've received, it's quite difficult. Some people find it quite difficult to understand. So obviously this is the opportunity maybe to get that clarification as part of these sessions. Okay, so let's commence. So what I'm going to do in true Zoom fashion is just do a test on the sound, and just to make sure that you can hear me okay. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. Just simply click and just confirm that my voice can be heard clearly and that you can hear me clearly over the background music. Give just a few more seconds to answer. Okay, so I assume that's going to be okay based on the responses. If it's not, then please, by all means, use the chat facility to make the facilitator aware so that you can provide you with some assistance. And what I'm just going to do is just check the vision. So can you just confirm that you can see the presentation on the screen clearly? So if I also just move backwards and forwards in this, that it's just moving for you smoothly. Okay, excellent. So if you are having any problems, again, please just converse with the facilitator via the chat, and then Harat M. Habab via the chat, and then he can provide you with some assistance. Okay, much appreciated. Thank you for that. Okay, so moving on then. So what we're going to do is start the class. We are Sabaeans, that is our nationality and cultural heritage. So I'm going to start with something in our language called Paa Pau'ut, the affirmation. So we start our classes with positive thinking, invoke the power of our ancestors so that the knowledge flows freely from them via way of what we had put together today, based on the master teacher. We call the master teacher, which we explain in some detail in a bit, and come over to you so that we can have a positive class with positive energy. So prayer, meditation, proper diet, etc. All these things are forms of positive thinking. So what I'll do, I'm going to recite or chant in the Sabaic language, or Misbatia, so it's Sabaic in English, and then I'll translate it back into English for full and proper understanding for all. Abdoi Kaleh Namazurat Wu Fakur Ame Kasam Paa Pau'ut Anuki Jawef Pa Ashuk Paa Pau'ut Wu Kale Ashuk Kawun Jawef Neya Anuki Kasam Paa Pau'ut Wu Paa Pau'ut Kawun Kasam Neya Anuki Wahu Ame Paa Pau'ut Wu Paa Pau'ut Kawun Wahu Ame Neya Nakuk Kadur Najo Ame Kasam Paa Pau'ut Wu Habub Ame Mushachas Nakuk Kadur Kawan Kale Pafef Nakuk Dayur Jawef Paa Pau'ut Ame Wase Ame Dayarni Kawun Lakei Bakoe Jawef Paa Pau'ut Anuki Abed Bin Afashni Paa Pau'ut Kawun Anuki Paa Pau'ut Kadur Nakuk Kadur Paa Pau'ut Amul Nakuk Amul. So that was Paa Pau'ut. And let's go through and see what we said. So we said, begin all prayers and thinking as a part of the all. I'm going to get into that in this class, in natural ether energy, certainly in more detail today. And we said, I am in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding, as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So that was Paa Pau'ut, and say much meaning and hidden meaning, I suppose, in those words, and we will be uncovering some of that, as I say, in today's natural ether energy session. And as I say, so you'll need to understand a little bit about that. We may revisit it to help us, as I say, to understand what's taking place in natural ether energy. Now, for those just joined us on the Zoom platform for the first time, welcome, as I say, on Zoom, and those who are joining us live to broadcast on Facebook. If you want the full interactive experience, then you need to join us on the Zoom platform. Facebook is a broadcast outward, so view only medium in that regard. So we're not monitoring the chat while the class is live. We do look at it afterwards and look at the sort of questions, etc., if there's any that have arisen. If you want the full experience, you need to join us on the Zoom platform. For those of you on the Zoom platform, if you do have any issues that you need to adjust your audio settings, that's shown obviously on the bar here for you on the left-hand side. You also have 3 buttons, clearly: the chat, raise hand, and question and answer. So if you've got any messages that are not questions, so for the facilitators, could be comments, feedback, so on and so forth, then by all means use the chat facility, or technical issues, things of that nature. Use the chat facility, and then the facilitators will assist you as best as they can. If you've got a question, however, and so we encourage all questions today. My name is Nabal Katnias, so I didn't introduce myself in the beginning, and I'm a student teacher of the master teacher. So if you've got a question for me, then there's 2 ways you can answer that question. I'll do my best to answer those to your satisfaction. So you've got the option of raising your hand, and if you raise your hand, what happens is that at the appropriate time, I'll ask the facilitators if there's any questions, and then you'll receive a message on your screen saying that the host would like to unmute you. Simply unmute yourself. If you've dialed in, then the option to raise your hand is *9, and to unmute yourself is *6. Yeah. Once you've asked your question, you'll be given permission to speak by the facilitator. And basically what you need to do is make sure that your phone stays muted. So you've got the ability then to unmute and mute your phone at will. At the moment, you don't have that permission. So just stay muted so as not to interrupt the class. But say you ask your question live, verbally, and I'll respond, and then say put your phone back on mute. If you don't want to come live in terms of verbally asking your question, then another option is to provide a written question in the Q&A section. And basically what will happen, again, at the appropriate time, the facilitator will ask that question on your behalf. Obviously, if I ask the question and you've got a follow-up, then by all means, feedback in that same medium to ask a follow-up question, or if it's answered to your satisfaction or complete understanding. Okay, so that is the Zoom platform as we have it for you today on the webinar side. And let's say if you are on Facebook, then you have obviously the option, please, as I say, post questions, etc. in the comments. We may not pick them up live, but obviously we can pick them up afterwards as it relates to the class that we're delivering today. So we use the poll. So we've done a couple of polls here to test the sound and to test the vision in terms of quality checking. However, we do use polls for reflective learning. And so here we have recap quizzes. At times I haven't got one today, so lucky for you. But there will be one at the start of the next natural ether energy part, and we'll be starting with that. So pay attention to what's going on, and so that you want to score a higher score as possible. It's anonymous, so it's not, as I say, shared in that regard, but it's a good way, as I say, for us to check that what we are teaching in terms of some of these subjects, which can be complex for somebody maybe new and not unfamiliar with Outformation coming to us in the form of information, and we want to make sure that we can best assist you to understand this doctrine. So let's get started then and crack on. A lot to cover today in some detail. So as I've expressed, if you're seeing a thing saying, hey, I joined for natural ether energy, and you've got natural law on there. So we're just covering off and finishing that off maybe for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll switch over presentations and move into natural ether energy. So a lot to get through today. More probably reading from documents than I would usually do, but as I say, we need to step through and understand certain terminology as it pertains to Wu-Sabat. So we need to have a basic knowledge before we move on to some of the more complex areas, or that have been made complex because of bad information that has been conveyed to us throughout our time here on this planet, and born into this time. And so one of the reasons necessary for us to seek some form of redemption, really, so we've been under foot of the Mukasu symbolically under a spell for the last 6,000 years, and more acutely for the last 400 years, from the 1600s and that so-called kidnapping down to the year 2000. So a change was necessary and needed for this day and time, to bring in line with the cycles of natural nature, to aid our transformation. And so who we call the master teacher, known as Dr. Malachi Z, York Okran, was born in Ghana, Takoradi, in 1945, June 26 to be specific, and was born to Mary Abba Akran York, also known to us as Fatima, born March 10th, 1929, and crossed over or transitioned to the higher life on August 4th, 2012, and so now plays the role of one of our Salafu or Muslafu, as we say in the Sabatic language, which means ancestors. And as I say, we understand the importance that many great leaders, teachers, etc., and teachers specifically in this particular instance, who may have been recognized as leaders, as I say, have been birthed from the womb of a woman. And so you have to understand the importance of genes, particularly mitochondrial DNA, as this is part of our culture and legacy and the science, obviously, of who we are, where, as I say, in this society today, due to books like the Bible, Quran, and the Torah, we have been, I suppose, taught a more patriarchal way of life, hence why their God is considered to be a he, not a she or even an it, overstood. And so this has meant that a certain portion of, well, it's an important culture, or the reality, let's say, of life as who we are as human beings has been almost erased or downplayed, etc., in terms of the role of the sacred feminine. And when we say feminine, they say feminine, yes, in English, but it's feminine, understood, as opposed to the femi-6. And so our Excellency, Her Royal Highness Mary Abba Akran York, played a great role in taking on board or to enable, as I say, the progression of the in-housing of these genes within Dr. Malachi Z, York Okran, to enable, as I say, that ancestral energy, power, and knowledge to come through in the form of her birthing our teacher in this day and time as Dr. Malachi Z, York Okran. So a certain special sacred feminine was necessary, and those genes, I suppose, have been protected for many thousands of years by various different sacred orders, which I'll get into for this class today, to enable this kind of in-housing to come through. And this is our culture, long, as I say, kept hidden from us for many years. He also has another royal side of his genes, which comes from his father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi of the Sudan, and part of the royal family of the Sudan. And that name at the end there, Al-Mahdi, links or ties him in, as he is the grandson of Mustafa Muhammad Al-Mahdi, as I say, Muhammad Al-Mahdi of the Sudan, known as the Mahdi, which means the guide, understood. And as I say, he was born 1845 to 1885. And so you can look him up, you'll find some tremendous history on this particular individual, as I say, known as the guide. 100 years in the actually Islamic tradition or degree after him, or after the Mahdi comes, is supposed to be the birth of the reformer, overstood. In their decree they refer to as Al-Mujaddid, but that is the reformer. So that person's going to reform all of these misinformation, doctrine, bring them up to a point of truth. As you know, truth is from a certain perspective, and then you walk back from truth now into facts. So exactly 100 years after the Mahdi was born, the master teacher, as you can see on there, was born. But obviously his role is significant in terms of meeting Mary Abba Akran York and them coming together to produce this individual. Certainly for us in the last 6,000 years has probably been one of the greatest events for our salvation. And so you need to find that out for yourself, not just because I'm saying it, but you need to find that out for yourself to understand the context and why. So we are living in a day and time where it's the culmination of, as I say, many great events that have happened, as I say, to free us from where we find ourselves today under the foot, so to speak, of the Mukasu, at least from a perception point of view. Now, this is the master teacher, age 25, as Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi. As I say, we obviously gave you his birth date, which also happens to be the start of the Sabbaic New Year. And in our culture, which is, I think, very important for us to recognize, in ancient Tamaray or ancient Egypt, we had a phenomenon referred to as Amun Nabab Rayay Achakhtar. And this is dealing with the fact of a vehicle or a vessel that our ancestors utilize or speak to us through in order to convey certain information necessary to be passed on at various points in this day and time. And I've done a lot of work with those who have been attending these sessions or have listened to the sessions either on YouTube, Facebook, or attended the sessions live, in establishing the environment and how nature works and who is controlling that natural environment and how it's utilized and used. So, excuse me, and particularly we go into some detail about the differences between the various races. So one of the things you have to understand is that different races are sent their own teachers, loosely in inverted commas, if you want to use the religious terminology, prophets, understood, but sent their own teachers to connect them or to convey that which they want their ancestors to convey the message of their ancestors so that they can reconnect, but also more importantly, prepare them for the next stage of growth or evolution. What you don't see, as I say, with the primary races or indigenous peoples around the planet, you do not see them digging up the bones of their ancestors, etc. So obviously for them to stay in tune, for them to advance technologically, some of those things are coming from solving problems. Yeah, let's say necessity is the mother of invention, but a number of those things have come because we've been taught by higher beings, higher forces. And if we use modern day terminology, in some instances, you could talk about extraterrestrial, you could talk about interdimensional, and also when we speak about mitochondrial DNA, then you're talking about, and also as well as gene interception, so genes being manipulated by way of mixing in with those with stronger genes. But also when you talk about mitochondrial DNA, you're talking about at a interdimensional level, codes being programmed into the DNA and RNA, which at certain points can be triggered, as I say, to cause racial wide, if we say that, genetic explosions, which causes us to advance. And we've been covering these subjects in some detail in previous classes. Now, why is it relevant to here? Because that Amun-Nubira Akatar, however strange it may sound in other people's cultures, when we're in the full knowledge of who we were, we understood that was taking place and how we received and connected with our ancestors. So at age 25 is what the master teacher recalls of being housed by being referred to, the Muslims refer to, in fact, as Al-Khadir, the green one. In religious degrees in schools, they talk about Melchizedek and different names and titles in different cultures. When we step back into ancient Africa, ancient Tamarin, to prehistory, then you see names like Tahuti or Tahuti, as it's being described as, for the same individual or being. In a sense of different cultures around the world has referred to this individual or our ancestor in different ways. So he was housed by Al-Khadir, the green one, at age 25. Organization officially started in 1970, although some of the first books were written in 1963. And then around about up to the point where the Holy Tablets was written, so this is around 1996. And the first, coming up to the time, as I say, where the first half an hour was almost complete. So 1996 certainly was one of the lines where the spell that had been cast on our people for the last 6,000 years was being broken. And each elder is given symbolically 1 hour. So that started from 1970, the first half an hour, to deal with the religious degrees and then walk us up to the point of the hereafter, which is when the devil hereafter, when the devil's rule ended, when the 9th of September 1999. And so we're moving now into the second half an hour, which was from 2000 now to 2030. So a different combination was needed. So here you're talking about in housing of Dr. Malachi Z could be in York or Cran, and him being housed by being referred to as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. And obviously you see in the picture here in the Rizkiyan look being described there. And that's a teacher in this day and time. So 19th elder out of the 24 elders. And when at the end of the cycle, the 24,000 year cycle, the 19th elder, as you may be aware, occupies the 25th seat, which is on Earth. So if you imagine, as I say, like a wheel with various different, or a clock, with 24 points around it. In the center of that clock is the 25th seat. So the different elders at various different times of our growth have been housed that 25th seat in order to convey certain information to us to aid our transformation from mortals back into deities again. So we touched a little bit upon some of those timelines. I'm not going to go in that in loads of details today. We've got way too much to cover. But this gives you an idea that when we talk about the Dr. Malachi Kabina York or Clan and refer to him as a master teacher, because we're making reference to the fact that a master teacher was necessary to formulate, as I say, a cure for our people who were, as I say, suffering under this spell. And it was a culmination of a line of great leaders and teachers, etc., even predicted in this instance by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad speaking of somebody to come with the Book of Lamb, which refers to the Holy Tablets, or the introduction of the Holy Tablets, which starts low. The Lamb is an Arabic letter, which is equivalent to the English letter L. And the Holy Tablets, each verse starts or chapter starts with the word low. Yeah, that's symbolic of, or the signature to tie those two together. In fact, the master teacher who's currently imprisoned at the moment was arrested on May 8th, 2002. And that's exactly 60 years after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad himself was also imprisoned, which in the Dogon calendar is referred to as a Sigui, in the same which you find mentioned in chapter 3 of the Holy Tablet. So all of this is connected as part of a bigger picture, a bigger plan, and say for the restoration of not only our way of life, known in this day and time as Wu-Sabat, but the restoration of us, obviously, as Musbatu, and the restoration of our language, Musbatiya, so that we can become who and what we are supposed to be, as opposed to a what. You understand? So this is the resurrection of a people who were physically alive but mentally dead, yeah, making no impact on the world, so to speak. When you look at what was released in 63, which was the Bible Misinterpreted Interpretations, and also the 9 Ball series, I think 4 parts of that. When you read the 9 Ball now with sort of hereafter knowledge and thereafter knowledge that we have today, you can see the amazement of that and the quality, obviously, of that those writings as basically a roadmap for how our race was to get itself out of the condition that it find itself in, by first of all understanding what had been done to us as a people, and then how we must work our way out of that. We understand that the transformation taking place with the change of the cycles, from moving from a lunar cycle into the solar or sun cycle, somebody would be needing to understand that, so that we could work, or our transformation was aligned with the changes taking place on the planet, as well as what is taking place within the universe itself. And so all of that was structured in an organized way and plan. And so, as I say, 1970 to year 2000 represents the first half an hour. And then from 2000 to 2030, this is known as the hereafter. But then within that, with the 2012 scenario situation, which was the rise of the woman back to power, or sacred feminine back to power, arcing ourselves or altering us from a patriarchal to a matriarchal society again. That then was known as the thereafter, in the sense after that event. So it's the hereafter the devil's rule ended, and then thereafter of the Earth, which is the 2012 event when the axis of the planet starts to point, or in this instance, it's starting to point towards the center of the galaxy, where there's a massive black hole. And as I say, this is transforming the energy received on the planet Earth. So let's move through this. As I say, in previous sessions on one of our YouTube channels, you can pick up one of these part 1 classes. It's going to go into this in loads of detail. For where we are at now today, we need to move on because we're going to run out of time. And so I'm going to move past this, not to and move past this, so I can cover off this, and then we can pick it up, let's say, in what we need to talk about today. So in part 1, in part 2 of this class, we went through, or started, I think, to go through these 9 doctrines of Tahuti. If memory serves me correctly, we covered the doctrine of the mental and the doctrine of correspondence. As I say, I'm going to touch on the others. Some of them will come into more detail as this class plays out. And in fact, let me just go slightly back just to help people out who maybe have just joined us for the first time. We want to touch upon this in the next session as well. So I'm not going to go into loads of detail now, but here, verse 16 of this particular actual fact, it's referred to as Master Secret, referred to as salvation. It says, we, Nathara overseers, have designated a genetic system, a scientific system of natural rules of nature, and they are on the outside of the natural rule. So we've been spending some time understanding what those rules are. And so there is a difference between rules and what may be referred to as laws. So when we are describing nature or the systems that govern nature, we talk about rules in our culture. So we talk about rules, as opposed to what we see in today's society. Society is governed by laws. And oftentimes those laws, man-made, and then you've got statutes and other things connected with what they call the law, are often in conflict or go against the natural nature. And certainly for us, as we spoke about in the previous session, their system, it favors them alone and it doesn't favor us. So it's not a balanced system. It is a just us system, just for them. Understood? And even in nature, this is unnatural. Understood? And as I say, it leads to what? Inequality, unjustness, and various other things, which leads to conflicts, so on and so forth. So, and violates a number of rules, as I say, that are built in within this system of nature, reactive system of nature, which there's no judgment within the system. It's obviously built in by how these rules work, i.e. if breaches take place, then this is the outcome or the result. Yes, and so we have rules, and we understand in our doctrine, obviously in various different books, the word law and the word rules have been interchangeable, but if you understand it in the here and thereafter doctrine, we've made changes as we've grown and evolved and learned more. Then rules are what governs nature, you understand, and they use laws. What happens is they try to combine nature and give it their system authorization, and then they create the rule of law. Yeah, so they're combining the two, the man-made and the natural. So we get back to more rules, understood, and within those rules, we seek to live our life aligned with natural rules, because our ascension pathway is to make our way as children of the Natharu, which you see in the hieroglyphics. The Natharu are shown with 3 flags. This is the hieroglyphics, or the Safaf script, that shows our divine, our ancestors, and so they're referred to as overseers or ancestors. And obviously, because we have descended down from that energy or gaseous state, we are referred to as their descendants, understood, or children, whichever term you wish to use. So, as I say, our alignment with nature, understood, and as we talked about in parts 1 and 2, actually, because our vibrational rate takes us, and because we are melanated, our vibrational rate, we are the manifestation of those original forces, and we'll explore that a lot in natural ether energy. Our liberty, or how we live and how we align ourselves and how we express compliance with those rules, means that we become the standard for all human beings, or all human life on this planet, because nobody else, in terms of their genetic configuration, could live to those heights or standards, because they do not have the apparatus to do so. So us living or being able to be aligned as the children of Paa Natharu should, in all actuality, set the standard for the system. We should be the reflection of those rules, or the best adherence to those rules in natural nature, by way of our expression, do you understand, or soul, in terms of how we act, how we behave, how we live, so on and so forth, understood? In terms of our natural nature, obviously, we've been living in the image and after the likeness of other than self and kind, and this is why the environment now is problematic, because one of our roles was to be the caretakers of the environment. Most of us, let's be honest, we just focused on our 9 to 5, so on and so forth, for many things in life. I mean, time to think about trees and in a sense things in the environment within natural nature. So these are things we got to get back to in terms of our liberty, because of who we are, not what we've become, because of who we are. And we can explore that, as I say, in some detail. So establishing that there are rules and a structure and a system is something that we have to now step back. So we're interested, as we've expressed many times before, in the cause that cause and effect. We're not just interested in cause and effect. Sabaeans are interested in the cause that cause and effect. So we're stepping backwards, as you can see with our journey. We started with the religions and we're walking our way back, and now find ourselves fully immersed in actual facts, master secrets and Patarak. We're fully immersed in our culture. So within this natural rules and systems, our ancestors have, over time, many great teachers have recorded the nature of how these rules work, and say one aspect of that is these 9 doctrines of Tahuti. As I say, who is that Amun-Nabab Raya Akhtar for us? And in this day and time, this Tahuti is the Amun-Nabab Raya Akhtar, happens to be Dr. Malachi Z, York. And so that Amun-Nabab Raya Akhtar allows us to say, almost to merge information from past, present, and future for it to affect, as I say, what we are doing now. So we don't need to second guess, because that information, which has been recorded, obviously from mind, in the kind of mental reservoir, is obviously available for lack of a better word, download, to inform us what took place in the past and have it reimagined for us in this day and time, to aid our understanding of how we need to progress and grow forward. Understood? So we are supposed to be we're growing into something. Yeah. or growing into nothing, depending on how you want to look at it. Understood? And so what are we becoming? You understand? And to understand that, we have to understand, well, what are we in the first place? We only know what that we've been taught in this society. So the 9 doctrines give us some insight into how the environment that we're in works around us. And really, the book is there for us to use to master, as I say, these various different rules, as we would have them, sometimes called laws by some, to make the best out of the life that we are living right now, and prepare us, as I say, for other forms of existence past when the physical body expires. So, and as it says there, the doctrines of truth are 9. He who knows these overstandardly possesses the magic key before whose touch all the doors of the temple of Khemenu, all the doors of the temple fly open at Khemenu. So, interesting phraseology there for us to consider. We'll touch a little bit about that in today's class a little bit later. So we touched on doctrinamentals. I'm not going to cover that again. I'm just going to move through these a bit more quickly. We did doctrine of correspondence. Doctrine of vibration. So you see, nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. The key to manifestation, but beyond things is all without movement. So, we're going to get into that today, because sometimes you hear certain terminology, like people say everything for a reason, and you know, there's not really analysis of whether that's true or not. So a certain decision may be made, for example, and people might say, because oftentimes, let's be honest, it's when it didn't go the person's way. It doesn't always happen like that, but sometimes when it doesn't go the person's way, they say, everything for a reason. As if to say that the universe is there, sitting there, almost in one sense, directing the course of every human being's life, and teaching them harsh lessons of life if things don't go a certain way. And I would say to you that this is not true. Most decisions, I say most decisions, you have to start with a point that all decisions and stuff that happens to us is a result of our own decision making. You understand? Even if it's a point of being what we might consider to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, when certain things in nature happen, and we don't understand the reason, for example, like chance, this is where the rules of nature are sometimes in action and we just are oblivious to it. We don't know how it works. So we may use words like chance because we haven't assessed or don't know or analyzed, well, when we trace certain things back, at what point did something that took place in a certain type of environment have a cascade effect that it led to, as I say, a certain change that happened in our environment, leading to a certain outcome and a certain decision. And most of the things, let's be honest, I say they happen because of decisions that we are making in the environment. Let's say if we take responsibility for it, then actually it's not everything for a reason. It's when something happens, the reason why it happens or takes place happens or is for that reason once the actual event takes place. So let's say, for example, if a person's falling out a window, you could say, is that supposed to happen? Well, at the point where they're falling out the window, yes, then, you understand, then that action is being concluded. It's right because the action's taking place. But there may be much time before that where that situation and scenario could have been avoided by different decision makings. And even the fact that the person's falling out the window, that is going to be the result of a number of different decisions that have taken place leading up to that point. So when it happens, that's when one can say, because there's this idea about predestination. So when it actually happens, that's when you could say, yes, that's when it's when it happens, that's when it's supposed to happen, if you're going to use that word, suppose. When it happens, not because some predetermined situation, then it happens. No, that predetermined situation is arising if certain things get triggered. So if certain laws or rules get triggered within the environment, then they're going to result in a certain type of outcome, aren't they? Or could result in a certain type of outcome if certain things come together. So if a man, for example, has sex with a woman, one of the outcomes of that obviously can result in a child being born. Is that whether you meant for that to happen or not? Some people want it to happen, some people don't want it to happen. But if the rules and certain things come together and are triggered, environment is at the right time, certain things within the environment of the male, certain things within the environment of the female, all of that comes together and those rules get triggered, then if that happens, it's as a result of, as I say, those rules kicking in and the environment being right at the time. It's got nothing to do with whether you want good, bad, blah, blah, blah in that regard, because some people you might think morally shouldn't be having children have them. You understand? And some people who you might think deserve children don't have them. Yeah, and this is to do with a number of different factors, isn't it? Timing, biology, the same in terms of health and so on and so forth. So we need to be cognizant of these things and what is taking place, and very specific in our understanding of what is taking place, because as I say, what people consider to be morals or judgments that are there within the system, what we're showing you is that that doesn't exist within the nature's system. Yeah, it's sitting, that judgment element is sitting outside of it. Now, so not to go particularly off the topic here, but nothing really. So everything's moving, but it's showing a state here where there is no motion or movement. So everything is a certain terminology. Everything is different from things. Yes? And so certain words we're going to have to be looking at in more detail. Is important in here. And then without movement. So a state prior to where things vibrated, there is no movement. So we need to cover that today, you understand? But generally speaking, we're saying the doctrine of vibration, it moves, but there's a state where there's no movement. Doctrine of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pairs of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. Which is it? You can't have it both ways. So, the amazement of Tahuti, one of our great ancestors, is posing, as I say, a number of different questions and points for us to consider. And this is making reference to the fact that in this world, the world of the Caucasian, particularly the Mukasu, as we say in the Sabat tongue or language, is the fact that they have created an illusionary world of opposites. And you know, all of these, I suppose, assertions to some degree are false, or ones that are asserted by the children of light. And hence why it finishes, you can't have it both ways. So if you think about, if you put, when you have two poles, let's say, let me take them literally, understood, they're going to be placed in the ground, which is a third point. So we've got two or opposites, but those poles to sit in something are going to sit in the ground. Understood? Yeah, placed in the ground. So there's this third point there that is not being factored in terms of this illusion. When you think about temperature, for example, you know, is there an absolute cold or is there an absolute hot? So when I say absolute, meaning to say that for every person agrees that this is where hot changes and becomes cold, or vice versa, cold changes and becomes hot. Are they really opposites of each other? Well, the answer is no, because if we look at temperature and we plot a point on temperature, we're going to say, well, we could say that's hot. Yes? But if we move, let's say if cold is considered to be on the right, and then hot is considered to be on the left, let's say we were looking at it on a horizontal system of measurement, and I go 1 degree to the right, understood? That's just less hot, isn't it? At what point does it become cold? It's less hot. If I go 1 degree to the left, one could say that is more cold, or you understand? Or it could be that's hotter. Understood? So the issue is that they're really both they're both in temperature, they're both degrees of the same thing. They're not different from each other. It is obviously the person's perception that is adding to it now and saying, well, this is hot or this is cold. But that's different for, as I say, for everybody that's out there in terms of their interpretation, do you understand, of what hot and cold may be. And so the polarity of how those things stand, it doesn't apply to all things. Light, for example, is not opposite to darkness. It has a different completely characteristics from darkness. Light is temporary, yes, because it can start like in the form of fire or motion of movement of particles moving in darkness, and it can go out, like fire can go out, isn't it? Light can be start one point and then it expires and can be burned out. Darkness doesn't have a start and it doesn't end. So they're not opposite to each other. In a sense, light exists within darkness. In fact, in certain environments, light creates shadow, which shadow may be considered to be opposite to light, but both of those exist within a form of darkness, and there are places within the darkness where light cannot exist. So this is what to say, you can't have it both ways. And so as we explore more Paa Pau'ut, or the all, or existence, then we understand that this statement or these sets of statements here are not factual. You understand that all truths are not half-truths, paradoxes, etc. Because, as I say, although nature, yes, it deals with balancement, understood, that doesn't mean that opposites have been described, as I say, are exactly are equal to each other or exactly the same in that regard. Equal does not always mean the same, you understand? And opposite does not mean equal either. So you have to understand that opposite is not the same, in the sense it's not the polarity, or what we're seeing in polarity is important when we're dealing with things like manifestation. But that's for another day. But we are going to explore the aspect of this when we're dealing with all. And so when we finish this class, you should have an understanding of why this illusionary world of opposites, which, as I say, is permeated throughout this society, why it's false. Yeah, like God and the devil, for example, in their religious degrees. Understood? Are they equal to each other? Because they're perpetuated like there's God and there's the devil. Are they equal to each other? Is that, or are they opposing? Is that, doesn't the devil work for God? According to the book of Job, the first chapter. Anyway, let's move on. So, doctrine of polarity, doctrine of rhythm. So everything flows out and in, everything has tides, all things rise and fall, pendulum swings manifest in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates to swing to and fro. You need a point of origin and a fixed spot to where the chord bangs from, and the first movement to start the swing. Yet all of this is in the all. This is a physical principle, a motive principle. So again, interesting. And I'm going to leave this for the moment. Suffice to say that, as you can see, with some of the rules, they apply to certain environments only. Understood? And so here, as the last 2 points are saying, this is a physical principle. And so what we're going to be doing in understanding natural ether energy, we're walking back from where we are at right now in terms of where the doctrine of rhythm applies. And it is important for us to understand how that principle works, because in one way, for example, somebody has been trying to control, in terms of our decision making, the way in which that principle works in terms of some of our decision making. And we, as I say, have to better understand how that works in the physical by having a greater understanding of what's taking place before, you understand, it becomes a physical issue or principle for us to manage. One of the ways in which you see the evidence of the doctrine of rhythm is, for example, if when you're making a decision, so say, for example, a person might say, look, I'm going to give up, just make a decision today, I'm going to give up smoking, I'm going to give up McDonald's, I'm going to give up KFC, all this rubbish food and things, I'm going to stop poisoning my body. And so they might go from an extreme, for example, and just stop, even though they may have been doing this thing for however many, 10, 15, whatever, 20 years of their natural life, correct? So what happens is you get a swing hard. Let's say if you say health is on the left-hand side and you say unhealthy is on the right-hand side. So the pendulum of that decision is going to swing because the person's put all this energy into it. And in this doctrine of movement, it's going to swing back with equal force and power in the opposite direction. And so what can happen is that the person might start for one day and then it's just too much. And so far as that swing in the opposite direction means that they then go back to the weight in which they were behaving, because it was too, the extreme of it was too much. Understood? Now, that's not to say that a person can't make those decisions, but they have to understand, for example, that equal force is going to come in the opposite direction when you're trying to initiate change. And so what you want to do is get to a point where that swing, if it's in this particular instance, is not as extreme. And the way in which we do that is that we build things up in a cumulative fashion. Do you understand? So when you're dealing with prayer, meditation, things of that nature, these are spiritual aerobics, isn't it? Same like when you go to the gym, etc., etc. You can't go to the gym, for example, and lift the whole stack of weights on day one. Is that you're gonna injure yourself? You understand? Because one, you haven't got the power, or you're just trying to put too much force, and then, as I say, on the reverse end of it, it can cause you damage. So you're going to build it up, understood, over time in a cumulative fashion. What this has the benefit of doing for us, and this is why it's helpful for us to understand it, is that when we're trying to live in a more positive way, a more positive frequency, and trying to manage all of the things within the poisons that we have to try to avoid or manage within the environment, because we're trying to get our physical right so our esoteric side can also have the best chance to flourish. What's taking place and is happening is that when you drop down, for example, so a person who's been training, let's say for 365 days, you understand, regular press-ups every day, training properly, cardio, so on and so forth, they're missing one day. It doesn't mean they drop all the way back down to the very beginning of when they started on day one, does it? They're only going to drop down a smaller level, isn't it? So that swing in terms of the environment is quite minimal. And that's what we have to get to in terms of life. So somebody who's been chanting 365 whatever days and so on and so forth is building up a cumulative amount of strength. So when they miss one day, it's not an extreme. If you notice, when you try and do, maybe you're going to start chanting, you start praying every day, and that pendulum swings, and you start, there's a lot of things when it comes back in the other direction of interruptions stopping you from making that transformation. It could be interruptions, phone, someone's phoned me now for a stressful situation or whatever, which I'm trying to get on this positive frequency, and something that the opposing side comes in. So understanding that that's coming means that you can be ready for it and then make adjustments accordingly until you can, as I say, what you want to be doing is building up that cumulative pattern. We want to control the rhythm, understood, as masters, yeah, in this environment, as opposed to now, who is controlling that swing? Because who is controlling that swing now is the Mukasu, isn't it? Because we're living in a society of multiple choices, and the decisions we make are not real decisions. They're not real thinking. They're not real decisions, and they're not real thinking in that regard. We are making decisions in a way where somebody else has already come in front of us, understood, and made those decisions for us. So we're choosing within multiple choices, even to some degree, certain sounds, certain things. If you watch a movie on TV, certain music means, oh, you're supposed to cry at that part or feel sad at that part. Certain other music may give a happy type of tone, or certain things that are showing you should react to it and be sad. Certain other things that show you should react to it and that should be funny, that should be this, that should be that. So these are all things that in this society we've been taught out of his mind of how we should behave, how we should react. Is it the case? Is it the case that that sound should relate to happy, or that sound should relate to sad, or that color should mean this, or that color should mean that? Or is these all things that we've been taught? Well, what's the reality of it all? You understand? So somebody's controlling that pendulum swing, and obviously part of us in restoring what we need to be in terms of this principle is climbing that ladder, so to speak, and seeing who's at the top, controlling it, and then grab the top of the pendulum and take that point, i.e. the point of origin, and take control of it back again, understood? So Wu-Sabat is the point of origin, or us in Wu-Sabat is the point of origin, not him and his mind as that point of origin. The doctrine of cause and effect. So here, every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. We touched upon that earlier, correct? There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. And law is all things happen in all. Law is affected by things in the all. Understood? So, number of things for us to look at there. And as I say, we're going to start looking into, say, natural ether energy. We need to understand this world of things and what is taking place here. One of the things that you see here is that there's an absolute correlation in certain beings between things and the world of some things. Yeah. And so all things, I suppose, are affected within the environment, so nothing escapes that. So these rules, as I say, law is a more of an older word. So in these rules, there's nothing outside of those rules. You understand? Because in that regard, so everything's impacted, everything's affected by it, and even a master cannot escape these rules and laws, understood? Or planes, as I say, planes of causation. However, what sometimes an incarnated master may use the rules of a higher plane to seek to impact something that's taking place on a lower plane. So when we understand what's happening, what is taking place, then we need to think about and move accordingly. So if one kills somebody, for example, you can't avoid, doesn't matter, you can't avoid the law that pertains to taking, if it's pertaining to a human being's life. You can't get around that. So it's not a case of what we might think in this society. This society gives the impression, for example, that if somebody's wearing a police uniform, or they're wearing a uniform of a soldier. So the uniform kind of psychology, in inverted commas, almost gives this thing of where there's some kind of justification for killing, but not according to nature's system, and not according to the rules of the environment. In the sense, if you kill somebody, then those laws are going to be triggered appropriately, irrespective of whether in your own perception or the society's perception around you, it was justified. And so remember, the great master builder, Amun-Hatap, son of Harpu, said self-justification is worse than the original offense. So this is showing you there is no sort of get out, and certain things, as I say, are all connected. And we need to understand this, because we might understand the laws within whatever, UK, laws within the States, America, so on and so forth, wherever we live in. But what's that got to do with natural law? Because in our society, they were much better aligned, understood, because we sought to stay in tune, in sync with Panatharu. You're living in a society now where someone is seeking to be the polar opposite of that, to go against nature and natural law. Understood? And here, this is important. All is affected by things in the all. So there is a connected set of actions and things that can affect those original forces. Hence why oftentimes this needs to be understood, and certain controls are put in place to stop or pause adverse behavior affecting connecting back to those original forces. And one of the things that's being described, I think, in the Holy Tablets, is this planet being under quarantine. One of the reasons for that is clearly because they understand the doctrine of cause and effect. Doctrine of gender. Gender is in everything, it has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Again, there is no real gender except what appears in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm. You are not male or female, you are God. So we do understand that, or we should understand that when we're dealing with the gender as it pertains to the sex organs. Then there's no gender discussion when you're talking about energy in the same way as it relates to physical, i.e. male, this and that, etc. Because obviously energy doesn't have those characteristics. You have to have gender, you have to have sex chromosomes, so on and so forth, as it relates to, as I say, us here in the physical realm. And then when you're dealing with spiritually, you're kind of looking, as I say, the chromosomes and those chemical configurations that result in gender. Obviously, for our species, it's XX for female and then XY for male. And then there are other combinations, 7 different types or whatever, that then includes hermaphrodites, so both genders or neutral gender leaning towards the female side, and then hermaphrodites, obviously both genders leaning more towards the male principle in that side of things. So again, and the interesting thing about that is that, remember, that feminine principles gave birth to male and gave birth to neutral gender. And so we, again, need to understand this. And even in ourselves, remember, we came from a point of a single point, which is, say, then split out into dual 2 genders. Understood? Yeah, so as I say, this is the doctrine of gender. Interesting, maybe not as much, but we will cover that in a little bit of detail as it pertains to us understanding why it only applies or appears to apply in these 2 realms, not the higher ones. Doctrine of growth. Growth is a manifestation of size, alternating from one point, should be in time and space, not time and space, to another. Creation is a manifestation of beginning and onto a specific designated point as found in the seed of the thought that initiates the idea of creation. All forms of growth, creation, are no more than a change in that which is apparent, in which either direction the onlooker perceives it. So this is very interesting. And let's say this for now, is that the word creation, from the Latin word creare, it means growth. Understood? So, and a lot of people talk, and this is where the religious world gets confused, and where we have to, in terms of breaking the spell and really walking back into our stuff and our thinking, which, as I say, certainly from this part and then into the second part of natural ether energy, we are going to challenge your perception. The doctrine is challenging your perception of reality, challenging your perception of what you're looking at, because it's been formulated, as I say, by bad information linked to the word in a certain formation, understood. And so how our senses are perceiving certain things. And the reason why is because people keep talking about this divine single entity, however you want to perceive it, and they keep saying the creator. Understood? And the doctrine of growth is saying, hey, this has got a fixed point, a beginning and an ending. You understand? A beginning and an ending. And which then forces a certain type of change according to what how we perceive it. You understand? How we perceive it. That's the point we're making. So the question is, what type of change is it? You understand? In terms of growth. So, and in fact, I'm going to leave that to explain that further when we get into natural ether energy. But it's an ongoing action. And remember, in order for this high being, most high, whatever God or that they say, in order to create, they have to exist first. So existence is before creation. And in order to have growth, we have to have growth within a certain type of environment. Understood? Yeah. So beginning is with the letter B is the second point. You understand? It's a second point. And all of this is within a certain type of environment. But interesting enough, I say all forms of growth are creation, are no more than change in that which is apparent. You understand? So again, when you look at creation as defined in Wu-Sabat, creation means growth into form or system, understand? And destruction means change in form or system. Understand? So you have to understand what it means in Wu-Sabat. Creation, growth into form or system, and as I say, destruction is change in form or system. And then, very important, is the doctrine of breathing, the ninth one. So everything appears to be breathing inward and outward. This appears to be the principle by which one acknowledges life. But in actuality, true life exists before the breath or the necessity to breathe to exist. So in here we see, as I say, breathing doesn't just pertain to air, you understand? So in terms of this kind of inward, outward type motion, and I suppose the manifestation of breathing as we find it in ourselves, it doesn't just relate to, as I say, what we perceive as in air coming in over surgeons and us taking oxygen, for example, and breathing out carbon dioxide. That's one type of breathing. We're not going to go into that in too much detail, as I say, in this class. So we have got a class referred to as the breath, or science of the breath. So seek out that one on YouTube, or seek out the actual book, even better, as it pertains to that. But if you want to know more information, we've got the whole class on the breath in that. So there's a higher aspect to it as it pertains to different types of life forms and what they express as breathing, not just, as I say, as it relates to how we use it in this society as pertaining to air and relating to certain organs in the body, but most in particular the lungs. Now, sorry, any questions? I don't know what time we got in.
No questions currently.
Okay, so let me fly through this. So I'm not going to go into these in loads of detail, but what it is that obviously we've gone through a certain transformation as a people in terms of uncovering or lifting off this spell. So the master teacher's been working very specifically, clearly teaching this doctrine on medicine or cure. And in that regard, we understood looking backwards that in order to initiate or deploy this particular cure, which is a mental cure, the mind has to be corrected first before the physical change can occur. So the mind has to be right before nothing can be done right unless the mind is right, in a sense. So it starts with right thinking, which leads to right actions. And in order to get right thinking, you have to have right knowledge. Understood? So, and then right knowledge, you need to be able to apply that knowledge at the right time, which is right wisdom. And when you understand its context, then and you can apply it in various different situations, I suppose that becomes right understanding. And then when you're over that information, that becomes right overstanding. So there are various different things that had to be addressed for us mentally first. And obviously, clearly, it's unnatural for us to be living according to nature's rules, in somebody else's image and after somebody else's likeness. No other race, as you are fully aware, worships a God that is not in their image and after their own likeness, except us. Understood? We're in everybody else's culture, and then sometimes in certain places have little respect for our own. So it was unnatural, for example, for the Mukasu to go into Africa and spread what they may consider to be their racial science of Christianity, also known as Caucasianity, to people who had already thousands, or 100,000 years of culture, who were living in their natural environment. You come along and think that you're civilizing them by giving them your vibration. This is unnatural in nature. So if you think about it, in that first half an hour, one of the reasons for they gave you Wu-Sabat in 1963, it was too heavy for us as a people. And so therefore, we had to go through a scenario where the mind had to be brainwashed. In a sense, I say brainwashed, I don't mean it had the Caucasian used it. I mean our brains had to be washed from all the negativity, the filth, the bad information, so forth and so forth, even to the point to put us in a place where we would question things. And even now today, we do not question things. We question the master teacher because he said question. So we question him because he told us to question. But we don't question him and everybody else to put them to the test. You understand? With the who, what, where, why, when, and how. Understood? And seeking confirmation, obviously, is the end result of that. Now, so in the cure, understood, you understand, as I say, a little bit of the poison has to be in there. Do you understand? Like in an antidote. So a little bit of poison is in the antidote, and hence why he said, I came giving you what you want, so you would learn to want what I really came to give. So we went through those religious degrees and then walked back through those degrees all the way back, because you see all world religions come out of ancient Egypt. So you went from a point where really, if you invert commas, gods have no laws that they live by in terms of that, you understand? So the decisions they make, as a result of those decisions, they bear the consequences of those, whatever they are, good or bad, to the individual. Understood? And as we can see now, as we understand it, all beings, all things are subject to those natural rules within the environment, even God. So according to their religion, if God is in heaven, then God is subject to the rules of nature. So he's subject to the rules of the environment because he's in. He's not out, he's in. So he's subject to those rules, not outside of those rules. Maybe why the gods of monotheism can't seem to control all the negativity that's taking place on this planet right now. Yeah? God was subject to those rules. Yeah, why didn't God just take out Herod in the Jesus story or whatever? I mean, just take him out. Why you got to send Jesus to Egypt in your story? Just take out Herod with the click of a finger, and it's not a problem, is it? And Jesus could be killed. by the rules within this environment. So obviously God didn't have the control of the rules within the environment as they have it. Now, to get too off the subject, so you've gone from a point where, say, an antidote had to be applied that had the poison, as it would be classified, that mental poison of monotheistic religion within, as I say, within it, in order to remove it from you. And so you've gone from a point where there's no rules, then to have what may be argued as religious rules, because we lived in these various different schools. We lived as the best of Muslims, lived as the best of Christians, lived as the best of so-called Judahites, to master those particular degrees. And then you stepped in the early 90s, into right knowledge where there was no rules. Yeah, because gods don't have rules, in a sense, and God can't have rules and be God, in the sense of those commandments, so on and so forth, and those type of laws. So they're going to deal with the consequences as and when they arise, taking responsibility, obviously, for their actions. So in that regard, you've gone to no rules. And so now where we understand better how we need to formulate our liberty and our society to be aligned back with where we're seeking to get into. So we understand, if you understand who you are, then your doctrine or what you're living by should cultivate your growth to enable and aid your transformation journey. So if you know who you are, then you know what's necessary in terms of ingredients, cultivations, optimizing your environment, so on and so forth, in order for you to grow into what you're trying to become. But if you don't know who you are, then that's going to be, as you say, left to chance, or not even left to chance, let me correct that, left to others to take control of what you're going to be growing into, as we see with happening with our youth right now. If we're not in control of it, somebody else can take control for their own ends and purposes, to serve their own ends and purposes. So we've gone from a point of saying no rules to religious rules. Now you understand, to align, we have to build back behaviors that allow us to live for and by each other and optimize our life form within the environment aligned with natural nature. And in order to do that, you have to bring in ethics. You bring in ways of doing things, Paa Pau'ut, the way, understood, and actual facts and master secrets, etc., also form a basis of restoring back or re-adding that knowledge which was lost, understood. And so people have to make decisions to agree to adhere to certain things, because we recognize, well, what we've learned in this society, we don't necessarily understand the who, what, where, and why a certain thing came in. So they might tell you, thou shalt not lie. Well, why? You know, we know some of the physical reasons that can be caused by lying in certain situations, for example, and what it can lead to. But ultimately, if someone tells you, thou shalt not lie, and then when you read in their various different stories, you see some of the principal people who are supposed to be the examples telling lies, then it seems to be problematic, seems to be hypocritical. The Israelites, for example, yes, according to their story, they had a law, thou shalt not kill, and the Israelites were not killing people, instructed by God to do so in many instances. And it doesn't say thou shalt not kill human beings either. It says thou shalt not kill per se. So does that include animals? Does it include, you understand, who they were slicing up, you understand, dropping the blood on the floor, whatever, and putting on an altar for God to light the smell. So suffice to say, you understand, we went from known to none, now to putting in things where you should understand the reason and the rationale for why we are doing it. So why we have that in place. What are the benefits? What disbenefits is it trying to or seeking to avoid as it relates to the growth of us as individuals and as it relates to us as a collective? Because that principle is talking about for and by one another. So we have a number of different ethics. As I said, I'm not going to go through them in loads of detail and point out some of the areas. If you do want a copy of these or whatever, then you need to just email us, and we can send you out the versions of this or share them with you if they're of interest for your studies. And so they probably need updating, so quite old. But so presume Musbatu when we're dealing with Nawapu. So here in ethics number 1, for example, saying we live for, of, and by each other, and not for and of by others who seek to subjugate, control, enslave us both mentally, physically, for our souls. So obviously guiding principle number 1 is that we are not existing to service the needs of others. Yeah, we are ourselves in our own right. And we talked to you in part 1, I believe, of this class about the codes of the races. So talking about those laws insofar as that each race has its own right to exist as it is and as it's supposed to be. And one is not supposed to enact actions on another race simply because of the color of their skin. And so if that happens, then there are rules that kick in referred to the codes of the races. So what happens is that not only the individual must suffer or receive judgment for their actions, but it must befall upon their children as well, because they've violated the code of the races. The interesting thing or whatever, because sometimes with this Black Lives Matter discussion at the moment that's taking place, and some people who tend to oftentimes want to speak against race, is that they say, okay, well, police brutality, for example, why are we concerned ourselves about that when black people are killing each other? Well, the two things are two different things, and so there's no need to merge the argument. They're two different things. One is everybody pays for, if you live in the UK, US, or whatever, you pay taxes, and you pay taxes as a citizen of that particular country. And one of the services is for the police to, so in America, I think it's protect and serve. I'm not sure what the same equivalent is in Britain, but there's a certain principles. I think in Britain, it's like the police work with the cooperation of the public. Yeah, so they're there to basically enforce certain rules. And originally, as I say, to protect people under, I suppose, a form of common law. You understand? Arguably, that's supposed to be the case. So you pay your taxes for that protection. So as a citizen, overstood, the first duty of the state, obviously, is to protect its citizens. You understand? That's the first duty of any state. So if the state actors, i.e. the police, are attacking certain groups of citizens based on the colour of the skin, then that's a violation of the contract of us as citizens that we were born into. And obviously there's an impact there also against our human rights. So that's one thing. That doesn't mean or have anything to do with whether black people are committing crimes against other black people. And when somebody says black on black crime, the argument is that how is it black on black crime? Black on black crime is must be exceptionally rare. And certainly it's not something that's taking place a lot in the Western Hemisphere. When somebody says black on black crime, really the proper definition of that should be a person has attacked a black person has attacked another black person because they are black. That is black on black crime. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? How can an internal violation of the code of the races, if it was one? A person has attacked another person because they are black. Not two black people have engaged in a criminal act where one person has attacked another person, resulting in a crime, and they both happen to be black. Because in that situation, if you apply it to the UK, they're both citizens of the country. They're both citizens of the UK. So it's two citizens, of which one may have perpetrated a crime against another citizen. It is an issue for the country. It's not a race issue. What happens is they like to turn it into a race issue because they don't want to apply the same performance standards or be held accountable for solving those crime standards in the black community as they do in white communities. So when it's a crime that happens oftentimes in the black community, they have all excuses. Well, it's the black people, they're not cooperating with the police. This is why we can't, solve the crimes or whatever, because the people are not coming forward. They're not cooperating with the police. My point is if the public choose to, in some instances, public choose to cooperate with police, some instances, the public decide, you know what, the ramifications for me cooperating are greater than I believe is worthy of my protection. So therefore, I'm going to stay out of it. I'm not going to cooperate. And that's a citizen's right. And sometimes citizens cooperate. Sometimes they prefer not to get involved because of the ramifications of them passing information to the police, sometimes as it stands in close neighborhoods. That's their choice. Irrespective of what the public do, the police are still supposed to do their job. You understand? If somebody works for a council, for example, and they collect rent from the council tenants, for example, when they come in front of the council board to ask them what's the performance, how's the income coming, because we need this money to do up the properties, pay the rent, so on, to do up the properties, maintain the properties, so on and so forth. Do you think that they can come and say, well, these tenants, man, they're not even paying. You understand? They're not paying, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. The tenants don't want to think, they don't want to know. Can they blame the tenants, or is the board expecting them? Well, that's part of the job. You need to do the job anyway. You need to get this income in. You need to find strategies and ways to solve this particular problem. Not blame a few individuals within that cohort or within that group. This is what they're allowed to get away with. And other blacks speaking against the race instead of maybe sometimes thinking about what they're saying and keeping their mouth shut. The thing is, in a recent incident where people not kneeling, for example, they can kneel. I'm not interested whether a person kneels or doesn't kneel. But it's interesting that the face of stopping kneeling, for example, in soccer in England, or football, as referred to as in the UK, it was a black person speaking against the kneeling, or was made to be the face of speaking against the kneeling in Black Lives Matter, and how they speak up and get used and justified. I mean, things not even been a few months in terms of its, or since the death of George Floyd. It's not even been that long, and people are, we're getting tired of this now. We want to do something different. But have the circumstances that led to it changed? No. You understand? So this is where they like to play games and have tomfoolery. So, as I say, first and foremost is that you don't have to live your life under the subjugation and rule of another. This is unnatural. You don't have to live your life as it pertains to their vibration, as they have tricked you to thinking, as I say, that's what you need to get along. Marry in, be us, speak like us, dress like us, eat what we eat, worship who we say worship, watch what we say watch, feel what we say feel. Yeah, this is what you must do to get along. Yeah, and if you try to go a different way, opposite direction, say, I don't want to worship the multiple choice decisions and books that you've given us, I want to do our own stuff, then they want to label you a cult. They want to attack you for trying to emulate and be part of your own vibration. That's how they have it in this society, certainly in the West. So reprogram is needed at an ethical level, because ethics is tied to emotions. Yeah, so that energy emotion is linked to ethics. Yeah, how we feel about certain situations. Understood? And all that has to be reprogrammed. Certainly in us. Because, as I say, it's unnatural for us to be living after somebody else's image and after somebody else's likeness. So you see some of the areas here which it kind of looks at. So we as Wapu or Musbatu, the Wapians of the Wunawap, do not succumb to public media and disagreeable advertisements. So is an interesting one, because a lot of the way in which we're impacted and affected by sixth ether is in, or they say sixth ether is in the atmosphere, and it comes through the different forms of media. Understood? And this is why I say you have to control how certain things make you feel or react when certain things pumped into over these airwaves. And a lot of time, even when we're watching television or movies, whatever, as entertainment, it's a pure compromise journey for us, isn't it? And so in terms of how some of the characters are treated, what we have to watch, ignore, subliminals in the writing, so on and so forth. Do you understand? This is what we are supposed to classify for ourselves as entertainment. And this society is one of compromise, not win-win for us. Again, here free, we as Sabians of Wunuwap do not succumb to any religious or political denominations or parties based on the Adamites Bible or Quran judicial system in the West, where we've been held since being kidnapped, enslaved, abused and tortured by them. You understand? So if we're going to vote and do various different things, then know why you're voting for, know why, what advantages it can bring, and know sometimes where you may be voting tactically to stop certain adverse forces advancing. Understood? But you know, we have to see them for what they are. You understand? The good, you may see it as good evil on one side and evil on another side, and maybe depending on your circumstances may determine how you see the various different political parties and their hues. This idea, for example, that I suppose in Labour, for example, in the UK, and the Democrats in the United States are for black people more than any other party in that way, is an absolute nonsense. So, you know, you have to judge them for what they're doing, for what they are, etc., etc. Do you understand? Because, as I say, both are adverse. Yeah, two wings on the same bird, right and left wing on the same bird. So we as Sabians or Musbatu of Wunuwap do not live by their racisms, prejudices, phobias, and prejudgments of others. So we've got our own culture, our own way of life, and as I say, some things, as I say, we need to look at of some things that we may have done for years, you know, maybe absolutely we've done for years are absolutely very different to the way we perceive our culture. And so when you look at number 8, for example, it says we as Nwapu and Nwapians of Wunuwap do not indulge or engage in any games of chance, sports, dangers to our person or other living creatures, or persons such as hunting for sport, game of rivalry, competitions or gambling. We not play games and sports for we do play games and sports for amusement and fun. Excuse me. But not for self-gain or ego to win over others, yet only for equal joy. So this idea, I suppose, or our idea or understand idea of what competition means. So that I'm going to take joy or pleasure to whoop your ass in a game of one-on-one in basketball or whatever, that we can't conceive another way of how that works. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I suppose our advancement is not based upon the denigration or downplay of others. I mean, if you're going to advance, you're going to advance, you're going to test yourself, or you're going to advance yourself by putting yourself through certain pressures or testing yourself. It is, I suppose, a more of an individual thing. It's not a thing to compete with your fellow brother or sister. You understand that your advancement is to their detriment. You understand your advancement is and of itself should be related to your growth as an individual, and it shouldn't necessarily mean that you're using competition in that way to bring that out for you, not in terms of the systems that we're seeking to put in place. And this is an interesting change of mindset for what we've been raised in this society, as I say, for. Right. Okay. So I'm going to move off of this. I probably spoke a bit too long on this section, but you can see, as I say, the ethics deal with challenging. So it's introducing rules that we should seek to live by, but it also has to address the reality of where we are as well. Yeah, and so that's what you're finding here is everything, not just a set of rules. Do this, do this, do this. No, it's do this, but actually the reality of certain things is look at where we are, look at how we behaved in the past. Are we going to sit here and feel guilty about that? Or what's the pathway to us correcting ourselves, etc., etc.? So there's always a bit of rules, but then practical application, if that's to be understood. Yeah, and that's how we develop our society, and we can only do that in the right environment. So it's enough to say, yes, have rules, language, culture, etc., but you also have to have a land that you can be free to practice your culture within for us to develop generationally, not just develop just us and our own personal desire for improvement, but how we develop as a collective, understood, and how that impacts us as a race. So seemingly through this this class, one should have, as I say, had this or come with an idea, as I say, that when you're making decisions, you're making them obviously for yourself as an individual, but there is a secondary aspect or responsibility where you're making decisions for the race. And as best as possible, those two things should be aligned with each other. And certainly for us in this day and time who have been subject, as I say, to the kind of mental torture, physical torture for the last 6,000 years, and more acutely for the last 400 years, we have to be cognizant of that and make decisions that they may not be what we want to do personally as an individual. Yes, but they may be in the best interest of the race. And so what you may quote unquote say sacrifices have to be made, in the sense a willing sacrifice has to be made, that I'm going to make decisions, I'm going to behave, I want to act for what is arguably the greater good, because if I help the race, I help myself. You understand? So as we expressed before, I think it's in the 9 ball, that which is best for the individual is not always best for the race, but that which is best for the race is always best for the individual. You understand? In terms of those two things that we need to think about. We haven't really got time to go through all these maxims, so I'm going to move on to natural ether energy. But there is one maxim that I wanted to go through. So in 305, it says, land is a gift from Paa Pau'ut, the overseers, to woman, and the sea to man. And the air they both share, but the heavens will always remain Paa Pau'ut's, the overseers. So how we act while using the air and the land and the sea will determine if they'll ever give us the gift of heavens. So men and women, or as women and men, we are different on the physical, understood? Yes, when it comes to our essence or being, there's no gender discussion. We're dealing with energy. We are deity in that sense, or supreme, or Nwep Mokwano, supreme beings, understood? But how we govern, how we manage the environment, understood, as I say, determines whether we will be given the gift of heaven, in a sense, or allowed back, one may say, to traverse the universes and the multiverses once again, in a sense, because this shows, in terms of example, that we care, in a sense, not just saying it by words, but by way of actions. And we can see what's happening where certain adverse forces on the planet are being removed, removed to the point of no longer existing, in order to pave the way for us to restore back and do as the children of the overseers should be doing, is managing and maintaining the environment that has been optimized for our liberty. Understood? So it's a very powerful maxim for us all to work together. As we can see in the very society we live in, constantly the black woman and black man's relationship to each other is continually under attack. Understand? And some feel, well, woman's advancement is our demise, and then vice versa, man's advancement is the woman's device. You understand? We're constantly pointing the finger at each other, which opens the door, as I say, for us to stay subjugated as a race. So we need to figure it out. Yeah, and Wu-Sabat is a solution for us to learn, understand both of our different roles and how we come together to succeed as a race. So, any questions? Let's get into natural ether energy. As I'm going to switch over. But any questions thus far?
No questions so far.
Okay, so everybody's a bit quiet at the moment. That's no problem. Okay, spare me 1 second while I switch over. Just while I'm on, just so it doesn't get, it is a little, I understand it can be a bit confusing. When logging in, you need to make sure, because this probably caused a bit of confusion, because it's a part 2, even though it's part 2 in the system, so class 1, and then it's or class 2 in the system, excuse me, but it's part 1 of this particular class. So what we have to do is that the 2 parts that we have, or the 2 classes that we have every month, we have to split them in Zoom. So it basically makes sure that they appear on the first Sunday of every month, and then the second class appears on the third Sunday every month. So you need to register for both classes to get both parts in the month. And obviously, because we're doing, we change the dates, part 2 or class 2 comes before in the schedule the new part 1. So that's why it may be confused. So people might be logged into class 1 and thinking it's class 2. So if that's the case, you just need to understand how that works, and then use the notifications that you get via email, etc., as your driving force or what's coming next. Yeah, you need to register for both parts. Only need to do it once, and then you're pretty much good to go. Right. Okay. So let's get into natural ether energy. Okay, right. So we've already done our introduction. So let's jump into what we need to talk about today in some detail. Right. I've explained this before, so let me go past this for now. For those who were not familiar with when we talk about Panatharu, the Safuf script, how it's displayed. In ancient Africa, your culture, this is shown, as I say, in as the Natharu. I think it's a little bit of a delay, so let me let that catch up. So you're looking at the same screen that I'm looking at. So you see the Panatharu there, the 3 flags or symbols there of your overseers or ancestors, and this is how they were recorded in the walls of ancient Egypt. But when we talk about the Natharu, we are talking about suns, yeah? So for those maybe joining for the first time, the manifestation, the physical manifestation of that is suns, the 193 million miles away, understood, and all the different suns out there. That is what we are talking about when we say Panatharu. We can see here in this particular diagram, the as we described, Outformation coming to us in the form of information, understood, being received by those who inhabit the planet Earth. Just note there's a bit of a delay between when I move the slides and what you're looking at. So if it becomes a bit annoying, just let me know, so I'll slow down the way I'm moving some of these buttons. So as I say, so we can see here the manifestation of the fire, and we can see, as I say, the open hand. You see that open hand there is obviously it's the ka'a symbol, but it's in a giving position, and so we can see there that there is a receipt of information by us here on the planet Earth. So our information coming to us in the form of information. But the sun also is a window into the, which is a manifestation, I suppose, of light energy to some degree, but it was birthed out of darkness. And I suppose bridges between the world of matter and world of energy in that regard. So here we see very clear interpretations of what our ancestors understood to be divine or deity, so on and so forth. And obviously in this society, they do a mind trick on those of us from the hoodwinked again. Insofar as if you ask a person, well, what does their mother look like? They've got a clear, vivid image. Ask them what their brother looks like. They've got a clear, vivid image. If they've got a sister, clear, vivid image. Understood? Ask them, well, who's God or Allah or Yahweh? No image. No image. It's in their mythology. Oh, well, God can't be seen, so on and so forth. But we are vivid people. Understand? And even in Man from Planet Risk, it talks about the vivid mind associated with God, if you use the religious terms, and the vague mind associated with the devil. So we're a vivid people, a visual people. This is why certain things were recorded on the walls to force you or cause you to remember things throughout the ages. Very visual, and so taking information in the environment to keep that connection live, and active, built upon, stronger, keep it stronger. See, because we're evidence of obviously the people, which we didn't cover in those ethics. One of them was called Negro, and that's talking about the bastardization, I suppose, of the genes and manipulation of the genes in the last 400 years to create, going from a Nagara to create this Negroid type person or whatever. Obviously, who's a black person by look, but lives in the image and after the likeness of the Mukasu. Do you understand? So a new type of black person within the race or hybrid was created by way of what took place within that 400-year kidnapping, which obviously we're still dealing with the results today. And it will take, even though the change has now happened with the resurrection of Wu-Sabat, the second resurrection as was referred to, it will take 400 years then, because the genes shift every 400 years. It will take 400 years to then get us back or remove their influence out of our genes. If we collectively start now, as we were speaking about earlier when dealing with doctrine of rhythm, collectively and cumulatively start those efforts and changes in our behavior right now, as it's, change. And we can see it's having an impact and a change for us for the race, but there are obviously many opposing forces that don't want to see us grow. So Natharu in terms of that symbol, and let's say all of this is out of all the different races, I should say, is all. So we represent 999, the Dravidian or Hindu represents 666, and the Caucasian represents 333. So these are numbers in our numerology, symbolic of the mental capacity, but the perfect number, i.e. for the Natharu, is 1000. Yes, and we see, as I say, the hallmarks there, or the symbols of existence in the number 1000, because within existence, space, time, and matter are inseparable. You can learn a lot more about that as it pertains to natural ether energy, but it ties back into the corresponding planet in the 19th galaxy, where our ancestors originate from, which is called Razak, or Rizq, understood, which is a twin planet to Tarnun, which is Earth, understood. Those two planets are linked, where we find ourselves as their children based. So 1000 is the perfect number because it represents the transformation back into energy, understood. And so the 9, obviously, which is reflected genetically in our hair texture, which curls up into a 9, if that 9 is then turned back completely, the hair is turned back completely into the follicle, then as you see with most Africans and even women, I suppose, who are closer to the original that we are as men, we're hairless. Understood? So walking us back to that point. Now, suffice to say, which we touched upon this slide earlier, we need to, before we get into, we are dealing with natural ether energy, before we get into that actual fact, we have to understand, I suppose, to some degree, what we're talking about when we're dealing with energy, what we're talking about when we're dealing with matter, and the environment. So we need to do a little bit of work on emotional energy, or the actual fact emotional energy, actual fact number 17, and to help us understand really what is taking place in natural ether energy. So many people seem to be struggling with a lot of the wording, brain, natural ether energy, and different things of that nature. So before we get into and dive in to a lot of the detail, we need to understand certain basic terms and terminology and sit there for a minute, and then get into the detail of what we're talking about with ether. So we're dealing with what is ether first, I suppose, in that sense, and then in part 2 we'll cover the different types of ether, and then if we get time, we'll sort of finish on looking at some of the symbolism of how our ancestors categorized certain stories and principles using the Safaf script, and how we need to be looking at and reading it and seeing what is being conveyed based on our understanding, as I say, of ether energy. Now, I just wanted to point out or remind us to the fact about these principles around our chromosomes. So when we were talking about, and we maybe didn't make the point as well as you should do in the last part, but you are not, so we talked about you making decisions as an individual, talked about you making decisions as a race, but as part of our responsibilities as individuals and our liberty, etc., what we need to make the point and understanding is how we are interconnected with the environment. So our liberty, how we're behaving, is directly connected to the environment. We are the environment. So if you want an improved environment, we have to we have the ability to change our behavior, which changes the environment. And so out of, you see here, our 24,000 genomes, understood, 24%, understood, is continually altering based on the settings we're in. So if we were in a room with other people, which is a bit rare now with coronavirus, your DNA is going to be altering based on the sound, based on germs, based on various different things within the environment. It's constantly changing. So it's reacting based on where we're at that particular time. The other 76% of our DNA is interacting with the morphic field, which, as we've expressed in previous class, so a morphic ties into shape, and it's where shape are formulated. It's like a storage bank for the species as it relates to the planet Earth. So, and it's the reason why, as I say, even though you've got people with different races, so on and so forth, human beings, if the sperm and the ovum come together, they're always going to, unless there's a defect in the growth process, whilst the individual's in the womb, so there's something wrong with the seed, which interferes with the communication with not only the cells, but the location which the cells are in. So it's interfered with that. Human beings are always going to be born with one thumb, 4 fingers, for example. Do you understand? Free or triad type torso, head. You understand? Torso, arms, legs, so on and so forth. They're always going to be born the same way, because the design, as it's connected to the planet, is stored in this morphogenetic field. It stores shape information. Understood? But what we understand is our interaction with the field means that when changes are made in the field, it changes everything for the whole race. So us taking on board this new cycle thereafter into the hereafter into thereafter outformation is making it easier for the next generations that are coming down now to absorb this information. So the resistance to it, as it was in 1963 when it was presented to them and they had no idea about cloning and different things, and accepting, even though we were supposed to be quite advanced coming out of the 60s, isn't it, in terms of advanced in the 60s, excuse me, with black empowerment and certain things of that nature. The scientific side, some of the way things were being expressed, it was just too heavy for the people. They wanted to believe, they wanted to worship, so on and so forth. But progressively, as the master teacher has taught, and we as students have received and learned and adapted and taken on board that information, it is affecting, made alterations not in our DNA, and it's made alterations in the field. So people are much more open to understanding, or the reformation needed, that all information pertaining to life, existence, liberty, our development, our growth, our progression doesn't have to come from the Bible, doesn't have to come from a Quran, doesn't have to come from the Torah. Books that didn't exist when our people first arrived here on this planet or were placed here on this planet. And still, even some of those cultures today, they have no clue about your Bible, Quran, so on and so forth, other than what other races brought to them, other than what came by way of invasion, other than what came by way of interception. Understood? So 19, so in fact, you are responding to alterations in your state of consciousness. This is the what's happening with the interaction with the field, the morphogenetic field. Yeah. So your satellite DNA's ability to expand the number of repeat sequences means an increase in outformation to your information learning capacity of DNA. So it's a two-way process. So the field can be programmed to alter and reshape the species, and we talked about earlier in the class, we talked about mitochondrial DNA, where certain things obviously have been triggered at an interdimensional level to force us as a race, I suppose, to evolve. So you think about even as simple things like speech, which we may touch upon. In fact, no, I'll leave it. We'll touch upon that when we get to it. So here we see, as fractal antenna, DNA interacts with the etheric of space-time and vacuum terms, which are synonymous in this context with your zero time point of 0.0. So, yeah, so when we came into existence, logged into existence, so not the time we were born, but obviously going back to when that sperm hit the ovum. So nature energy which interacts with your consciousness. So this is basically showing that there's an inherent link, and we're going to explore this in more detail, going all the way back to particles of energy, millions, billions, trillions of years old. So I'm not going to say beginning, but going back to that state. Understood? So we reflect that journey and communication going all the way back. There's a structure, there's a line of how we're being influenced today. So each race or species affected by the environment, everything they are taught, believe, and accept, everything they shall eat, drink, eat, yafuh, breathe in, all is affecting your state of akal mind and being, your 24,000 genomes, and 24% of them you use at all times. And the 76% that you have been Zuba lied to and told are not used, called by them junk DNA, which is true for them, but not for you, Nagaru Negroids. Seek out your DNA salvation, which can only come by way of your own Salafu ancestors. So our next level of evolution, our ascension journey, is being informed by our ancestors by way of our Panatharu. You understand? Hence why they have sent one amongst us to grow and amongst us to develop a version of Wu-Sabat that has been designed for our mindset in this day and time. As other races have had teachers sent to them, whether they recognized that they would fall under what would be classified as divine or really extraterrestrial in nature and origin. So obviously where they're at, they understand what is necessary and what is needed for us to grow into what they are. Understood? Yeah, and we're in a state of transforming if we do the things which are necessary to become, I say, who they are, which is our genetic right, clearly as their children. So just a reminder slide around this as well. So when we talk about this world of nothingness, the reason why they say dark energy and dark matter is because they can't see it. So with modern day instrumentation, they can't see it, but they know something's there because basically the mass of the universe, as they would have it, or they call it the universe as in one thing. The mass of the universe doesn't calculate up. So what's visible, for example, if they add up all the visible elements, all the suns, planets, and try and work out the mass, it doesn't correspond or doesn't fill up all of the space. And so certain things they know are affecting the movement of the objects, which they can see. So obviously when you say dark, it's because we can't see it. Now, for our purposes and understanding, we need to now delve deeper into this, because we are interested, when we're dealing with natural ether energy, we're interested in this space, or space per se. So what is in space, or what is, when we're talking about space, what is it we're talking about? Because they give the impression that space means nothing's there. What we're saying to you now is, in to aid your understanding, you have to understand, no, space is not empty. There are things there. And what are those things? What are their purpose? What's it for? How does it affect us today? And how do we merge back into that space? So dark energy represents or makes up 76% of existence. 24% of that existence is dark matter. Yes, there's a combination of them. So energy here before matter. Yeah, triad principles, and we have dark hold in that regard, which is dealing with time. I'm flying through these because they're not relevant for what we're dealing with today. Now, so that matter then breaks down into 90% matter, and as those will be familiar with, 10% of it is dealing with light. So everything that we can see, the planets, we've gone through this before, but just a reminder for those maybe joining us for the first time, planets, suns, everything you perceive in the known environment within existence, you add up everything, all that kind of matter, material, etc., it only makes up 10%, or what you consider to be the visible universe, it only makes up 10%, you understand, out of that 90%. So a very small part of existence, but we're taught to give credit, credence, praise, worship the light, and ignore the darkness. The darkness is perceived in this society, or taught to be bad, isn't it? Yes, negative. So Black Monday, Black Friday, black male. You understand? So negative. Yet when we see the reality of existence, we see we're living in a world of darkness, not light. Light is temporary. And when then light expires, what state do we find ourselves in? When the light is cut off, what place do we find ourselves in? Darkness. The light is cut on in darkness. So why is the darkness not respected? Why are we not respecting the darkness? And the manifestation of darkness is the Nagaru people here on earth. The manifestation of darkness is within the womb of the woman. Triple darkness. The 3 trimesters of a soak when the woman is with child. But it's not respected. As we see, many of the things in nature is not respected in the Western world, in particular. And now world over, because of the influence of those who are controlling what we might argue to be society for us right now. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm noticing if you're on Facebook, it may take a little bit of time for these slides to figure out how we can improve that. But we are where we're at. So I'll try and remember, I'm looking at it at the corner of my eye. So I'll try and slow down. Sometimes I might be speaking about something that's not shown on the screen. So, okay. So emotional energy. So a few things from Etimo Online. So I suppose the meaning of words, opposed to the definitions that we're interested in. So when we talk about emotional energy, actually, it is a composite of 2 words. So, and we can see the kind of meanings there. So energy, force of expression, interesting enough, associated with the word work, activity, so on and so forth. And an emotion, moving, stirring, agitation, in relation to that. But we know that it's a composite, isn't it, of 2 words, energy in motion. Yeah, so we talk about emotional energy. That's the first fundamental understanding, that is energy in motion, we're dealing with emotion. Understood. Now, we've got a separation that we need to understand between, or a type of separation between matter and energy. Understood? And there are slightly different characteristics which we need to understand. So let's look at this. So it says the movement of things. Electrons and other subatomic particles are clusters of energy in motion. So when we talk about emotions or energy in motion, know that that's what we're talking about as well. So that's including that. It's not just what we think, happy, sad, understood. Yes, there's certain things that have been conveyed by way of word association. Because when somebody says emotions, you think crying, tears, so on and so forth. But it's talking about energy in motion. So these particles moving, understood, can also be included in that definition of emotion. It's not just describing our feelings, so to speak. So charge of electricity explains certain attractions and repulsions relative to charge and magnetic fields. Atoms move in an orbit. Even protons in atoms travel in a tight orbit, which determines its apparent diameter. In addition to orbiting, nutation is a key attribute on the motion of subatomic particles. So this is quite interesting. So one of the things that you have to kind of understand, and one of the challenges that we face, is because we've come from a point where, say, we've been living in somebody else's image after somebody else's likeness. And what happens is that we are, as a result of that for many still even now, is their frame of reference or source of information. So what happens is that we've learned various different things by so-called official sources or sources that have been around a long time. And that's become our frame of reference. So when you pick up something like Wu-Sabat is battling against, in our mind, that frame of reference. So even though we've been under the white man's kosh, the Mukasu's kosh for many years, because we've been used to it, when somebody brings an alternative, we have to compare it to, we want to compare the new cycle information and compare it to what the white man's said. And if the white man verifies it and confirms it, then emotionally we feel, yeah, that's solid, that's true. You understand what I'm saying? But the question is, when the white man's, who says the white man's correct? Who says he's right in what he's saying? What he is saying has never really been challenged. It's been accepted oftentimes, or certainly from our people, I'm talking from our people's perspective, it's been accepted as solid and true. There was a certain source, which I'm not going to mention and give any props in their name, but they basically challenged the master teacher's system of classification of genetic strength as it relates to hair texture. So many people may be familiar with the right knowledge of the doctrine. As it was introduced, talked about different hair textures in 9 ether, 8 ether, 7 ether hair textures. And this source challenges it. Well, where did he get the proof of that? How can he say where he got this particular from? When we look in the biology books, it doesn't, the diagram that we've drawn, it doesn't correlate to the diagram that we find in biology books. A worthy challenge, maybe, some might say. Not an issue, not a problem. The issue though was that the person making the assertion never challenged what was in the biology books as their depiction of hair texture. They never challenged it. So it's not a fair appraisal then, is it? And even if I go, for example, we're in the UK, if I go on the UK NHS websites, we have a national health system, and I look for health information as it pertains to certain symptoms around certain diseases, it doesn't describe the symptoms as it pertains to me and my skin color. Even though it's supposed to be seemingly national, so it must describe how it affects everybody, those symptoms in terms of some of the colorations of certain things, they don't apply to my skin texture. I'm not going to get that color of certain types of things on my skin type. So there's an assumption, because it's coming from a certain source, that that's correct. So what we have to work towards in terms of breaking the spell is to reverse, because a student teacher or a student or a true Sabaean has adapted and changed and made Wu-Sabat their point of reference and judge everything else by way of Wu-Sabat, by way of putting the master teacher seemingly under pressure by question, check, research, check this, does this confirm itself, etc., in order to alter and make Wu-Sabat your reference and then check everything else against all others. So here, when we're looking at this diagram about how things work, you do not get the sense here that the protons in the nucleus are moving. They give the impression when they draw these diagrams that these are stationary, so to speak, in the middle. Not as it's just been described there in motion energy, that the actual protons themselves, are not only spinning, but are moving in a tight orbital structure, which is a characteristic of matter. Overstood. So these are some of the challenges why it says we were told in the beginning, read with an open mind. And still today, one must read with an open mind, isn't it? Yeah, be ready to receive new information, be ready to be challenged. This is part of our ascension journey, understand? And why it can be challenging and difficult at various different points or times. So, just because they draw something and it comes with so does not mean it's right. That is someone's interpretation of what the atom looks like. It is not a picture of the atom. It's someone's interpretation of the atom. Nonetheless, what we are getting, emotional energy gives us a sense of, or is pointing out, that the world as we see it today is not solid. Not solid. There's a lot of space in space. What appears to be solid is simply an illusion because we're looking at it from a certain perspective. And apologies if the picture's not 100% clear in terms of this slide, but this is the configuration of iron. Yeah, so something that's really very dense, you understand, very solid. But when we're looking at the configuration of it, if we looked at it with a strong enough microscope, for example, yes, we would see the electrons and protons in correlation with each other, so in a certain type of configuration, but it's not solid. It appears solid from the perspective of where we're looking at it, but it's not. Now, when we're dealing with natural ether energy, we're interested as well in what's between the space. What are they existing within? Because there's something in that particular space. Now, so we're interested in all the characteristics of matter. So we're interested in, we know it's energy in motion, and we know matter has a certain type of movement, and we're interested in the characteristics of that movement. Another particular characteristic, which you read on those notes previously, was this idea of nutation. And we look at the word, we see it relates to nodding or to nod, to rock and sway involuntary, tying back into nod to bow one's head or to shake there. Yeah, and these are some of the other words that it's connected to. Nutation from obviously a scientific, point of view, is aligned with precessional movement. So the movement of the axis, then how they would describe it, they're saying that, okay, if we take the planet Earth or Paa Pau'ut, for example, it's being pulled on one side by Mercury, it's Venus and Mercury, for example, and the Sun. And then on the other side, it's being pulled by Mars, Uranus, Jupiter, so on and so forth. And that's causing a wobbling effect, understood, in its axis. Yeah. So precessional movement obviously is dealing with that axis spin or turn, which is a characteristic of gyroscopic objects. So if you think about spinning top, where you press it down or whatever, and the old type of toys, spinning top, you press it down and obviously let it spin on its axis. Understood? It's spinning, isn't it, as one motion, but then it leans back, the top of it, and on its point, it's leaning back in a circle, which is making a circle based on the axis movement as well, isn't it? And so then a third movement is that we're adding in here is talking about nutation, where that axis is nodding or moving sort of back and forth. So we see it better in this diagram here, isn't it? So we understand that we're getting the planet Earth in itself is spinning, isn't it, on its own axis. And then what we're seeing here, so spin on its own axis, we're seeing that spin. And then what's happening is we've got precessional movement here, which is its axis point, which precession change of precession of the equinoxes is talking about the movement that takes 26,000 years, that's aligning itself with the celestial houses, I suppose, as it pertains to the planet Earth, and how that axis point travels through those houses and takes a period of around about 26,000 years to make a complete circle. But then that axis point is being then shifted and nodded by various forces. But inherent in the universe, or the physical universe, or what we may describe in the physical plane, is that all of the atoms, all of the material within that environment is subject to the nutational rate of the physical universe. So here it's saying, as expressed there, they're all nutating as exactly the same rate. So this is how you know, okay, where we're on the physical plane is because of nutation. Understood. Now, interesting enough, to notice that the planet Earth had or Paa Pau'ut had a wobble in its axis. The master teacher explains is that it took 2,160 years of continuous observation of the planet to even notice that there's a wobble in the axis. This is telling you how long we've been around for. 2,160 years to notice one of these on the larger scale. Yeah, so we tracked precessional movement as I say, certain calendars, the star map of Dendora being the latest one after the axis shift. But nutation obviously is important for us to know, as noted in verse 5 of emotional energy, saying, Nuwapians, or Musbatu as we know now, you must overstand nutational motion because it is the very key to the secrets of the universe that you are in right now. Yes, the word must is used. Not nice for you to know. You understand? Okay, if you do it by choice, blah, 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 blah. Say must. So, we can't rest on our laurels as Musbatu, as Nagaru or Negro people in this day and time. We got to, maybe you might be 50, 60, 40, been out of school for however many years or whatever the case may be. You got to get back into the sciences. This is what Wu-Sabat is regrowing your mind to do. You've got to get back into the sciences. You've got to get back to learning things and studying around the subject. This is not a belief system. So, but you're living in a day and time where you live in the information age. So if I don't know what nutation is, I can go and look it up. You understand? Within Wu-Sabat and other sources or whatever, if necessary, to aid my basic understanding, so I can come along back again and master. What is the master explaining here? What's being expressed, understood, for my benefit? You may even go to other. So you may look and go to other Sabian books or whatever, or Wu-Sabat books to look at, okay, where's this explained, so I can get an understanding of what does he mean by that particular statement. Understood? Us being the frame of reference, but it doesn't exclude obviously other sources we may read for complete and thorough research into the subject. Now, so it says the movement of things. So in fact, subatomic particles of matter and each quantum particles of electromagnetic energy spin on their own axis. So this is a characteristic, isn't it, which all do, even suns. So we say suns don't move, but suns do. They don't move in a direction, or so not in our universe. They don't move in a direction, but they turn on their own axis. So when they say they don't move, they say it must be moving in a direction because they do turn on their own axis. All particles spin. So they spin on their own axis just as this planet, Paa Yaanuwn, Earth, turns on its poles, and that all these axes wobble at one constant rate regardless of energy or mass, called it sum. You understand? So we've just expressed that. How you know it's the physical universe is because of the nutational rate of the particles, and it doesn't matter whether it's atomic size or planetary size, you understand, in the physical universe. Understood? And we covered that in a previous class in reflection and projection. So as the sum of a thing, something, so listen here, something is really something, some of its weight, size of its particle. 9, it's important that you distinguish between spinning and orbiting, although all particles spin. So this is a say from a previous presentation, but so imagine this is spinning on its axis, correct? Yes. So all particles spin. So if we had the animation working, we'd be showing that this planet Earth would be spinning and turning on its axis here. Understood? So that's spinning on its axis versus orbiting, which would see these obviously moving around, isn't it? This central point, the sun, you see the planets moving around, this central point. And so that is orbiting. So these particles are spinning and they are also orbiting. So they've got two characteristics in terms of the movement of things. So as you're more than familiar with how planets obviously orbit around the sun, hence why it's referred to as a solar system, because they're trapped within the sun's gravitational pull and therefore a part of the sun. So why is that important? Well, because particles of matter, as it's been expressed here, move in an orbital fashion as well as spinning, and energy particles move in a straight line. So we've got a distinction between two different characteristics from two states. So we recognize that energy clearly comes first. And as we transform over into the material side, or it's referred to as the physical universe, then we're dealing with matter. So at least from how we've measured it and classified it at this particular point in the sand. But the definition of what matters can be expanded, understood. But here, to help our understanding, as a clear definition. So matter moves in orbits, energy moves in straight lines. So we can see that, isn't it? Yeah, matter can be is classified into gas, liquid, and solid for our understanding. But interesting enough, in Man from Planet Risk, the Master Teacher points out that all of these particles in actuality are solid, and that we've not encountered real liquid yet. That's because they're all particles, but that's another thing maybe for him to explain in more detail once he's released. So, but it's an interesting premise that we've not actually encountered real liquid in this state currently, because all of these are made up of particles. They're solid particles. Now, so there's a clear, we talked about nutation, so you should have an understanding of that. But the power of nutation, so basically, as it's set in the natural system that they have it cannot be changed. So there's no power in the universe that can change the nutational rate of an atom, can't change the nutational rate of a planet. Understood? They vibrate at that particular frequency under that doctrine, under those rules, and it cannot be altered. So no power in this universe can alter that nutational rate. Yeah, so it's a constant and a characteristic, as we were just expressing, of these particles. Two inherent forces, gravity and magnetism, that, as I say, can affect the spin of matter. And just looking at the description here, more information, do some research into these in your own time. But gravity is defined as a natural force of attraction exerted upon a celestial body such as the Earth upon objects at or near its surface. So obviously we've got, because we're on an orb that's spinning through space, isn't it? We are subject to two forces, so an equal amount of gravity, which is pulling us towards the center of the object, and also levity, which is obviously pushing us up. So you think about I suppose if you were on the top of a ball that wasn't enclosed or something like that, and it started to spin around, if there wasn't gravity, you'd fly off. So there's two forces at work which keeps us, I suppose, stable to the planet. You also understand, as Nagaru, that we have a central sun referred to as a solar plexus, and the planet itself is not hollow, and it has a central sun 600 miles in diameter. Understood? The both of which are of a similar configuration. So our sun, we are between two of those energy forces, aren't they? We're between the sun, which is 93 million miles away in one system, and we've got a sun essentially on the planet Earth, which is in the Earth, and then we've got ourselves as another sun, a terrestrial sun, which is on top of the surface of the planet. And so one force that is exerting or pushing downward pressure, and then one force is pushing upward pressure. And the reason why we appear to age is because our ability to resist gravity weakens as we age or we get older. Understood? Because our blood weakens, the strength in our blood weakens, and our ability to resist gravity weakens. Hence, as I say, coupled with, as I say, the exploration of telomeres, which shorten obviously on the tips of chromosomes as they shorten, and they determine how many times cells regenerate or recycle. But we are subject to what appears to be aging because of, say, that ability to resist gravity weakens. And obviously in their case, you can see that because of their deficiencies, literally almost as they old, their spine starts to curve and various different things of that nature, which high heels was invented obviously by, or influenced only by their extraterrestrial overlords in order to help them to walk more upright. We now have used it as a fashion statement, but if you align the high heel, as you're fully aware, with the heel of a canine, you see that the arc of the foot, the toes, and the foot itself, the arch of the foot and the heel, it's in exactly the same position as a dog's foot. So when we're wearing high heels, not we as in me, as a man, but those who choose to wear high heels know that, as I say, it was a device used to help Caucasian females to straighten out their back, understood, because of that curvature that happens within their spine. And as I've said many times in this class before, yes, genetic inferiority within the human species has been associated with that which is what? Beautiful. Genetic strength or dominance or superiority has been associated with that which is ugly in this society. Yeah, when you're looking at the human race. So, this obviously presents a problem when you're looking at certain things, because they've been around for a long time and no one ever questioned or challenged certain things. No one ever questioned or challenged certain ideologies or habits, understood, as to where they came from, what was their purpose, who invented it, so on and so forth. We just accepted it, just pick the shoes off the shelf and say, yeah, this is what's beautiful. For those who like that, I'm not saying don't wear them, I'm just saying we never questioned it, not knowing that actually this was something that was used to address a defect in another race, like knife and fork. We eat with knife and fork. We never question, why do human beings need knife and fork? We got our hands. What was the purpose of knife and fork? Who invented it? Why? I mean, it's not efficient, is it? Why not use your hands? Yeah, if you keep your nails short and you wash your hands, so on and so forth, your hands are quite capable of, you understand, eating majority of foods. I don't know if you eat rice with your hands, but you know the point I'm making. So, but why was it invented? Again, these are tools which were designed to address a diseased people. So a knife and fork was necessary so that people did not put the disease or the leprom or leprosy from their hands and cause it, as I say, to be placed within their mouth. So it is what it is. Now, the point is that, or getting back to what we were talking about here, is that it's a force, in terms of gravity, it's going to be a force that's pulling towards the center. We need to explore this. So remember that, at least that principle, because we're going to be talking about suns a bit later, and you understand that better if you at least understand what is pulling, that there's this inherent force in the universe which is pulling that, as I say, towards the center of things. But it has an opposing force as it pertains to us here on the planet Earth, which is called levity. And you've got a force exhibited by, which is magnetism, which you are familiar with when it pertains to obviously metallic objects in some instances, which are magnetized, where the positive and negative poles are attracted and the like sides of it will repel each other, and that force is exerted by a magnetic field. We see here just very quickly that the planet itself is protected by, shielded from the sun's, the electromagnetic energy, from the sun. We are shielded by a magnetic force field referred to the magnetosphere. Remember, only about 1% of the sun's, the energy being exhibited or expressed by the sun, sent out by the sun, about 1% is needed to provide the necessary heat for all life on this planet. So some tremendously powerful entity, as I say, necessary obviously to shield us from it. So this was referred to as the Rainbow Project, when life was ready to grow out of or evolve out of the waters. And so it was necessary for them to build several spheres to shield the emergent life forms from the significant solar strength being exhibited within the solar system. So you see the correlation, or you should understand the correlation under the doctrine of correspondence as well, which I think we touched upon in a couple of classes, of our relationship with the environment. Understood? So we are a universe. We are also have the same characteristics as the planet. Understood? Central sun. As you can see, the correlation between the amount of liquid that we have inside of us, around 71%, including all the liquid, bile, blood, so on and so forth, water, of course, about 71%, and then 29% is matter or material, solid, which is a similar percentage to the planet Earth itself. And as you'll be fully aware, most of the water on the planet is obviously got fresh water, but most of the water on the planet is salted water, or saline. And I say it's interested in when we're talking about when people get into hospital and they get to be rehydrated and they put saline in their system. Salinity is obviously describing how much salt is in the water. And as I say, it's funny that human beings, I suppose, are given salt water in order to rehydrate themselves or as part of their recovery when they go into hospital. Now, so we have touched upon these subjects before, but it's good for us to remind ourselves for what we're looking into. So this is an interesting statement that coming out of emotional energy, where it says matter is a concept of human beings' sense perceptors. So what your understanding is of this is that basically the fact that things appear solid is because our senses are made of the same material that we're looking at. So, and as I say, we're looking at clusters of energy, which, as we now understand, when it comes to matter and material, they are moving in a orbital motion, understand? And there's a lot of space between them, understood? So things, as I say, is not as solid as they appear to be. So we can see even in this depiction of the atom, there's space in between. And atoms and cells, you understand, having a nucleus, so on and so forth, having a skin or an edge to them, yeah, they have the same characteristics. Yeah, so one's obviously matter, and one's obviously pertaining to biological, same characteristics in terms of that solar system configuration. Now, point being is that when they depict and draw the cell, we get this kind of idea of it having a shell, which is really the orbit of the, I suppose, the furthermost electron. And when we're looking at the cell, it gives this solid line, doesn't it? Yes, correct. So it gives the impression that it's solid. It's got some kind of skin that surrounds it, that it's contained within. And when we look a little bit closer, obviously we can see clearly that the skin is not really skin, but it's the movement of the orbit of atoms. There's a lot of space in between there. But then we look at the skin of seemingly the skin, as it's described, of these cells. We see the lipids bilayer. And we ain't shown it, the animation of this in this particular thing, but we can see that these lipid bilayers, they move. Obviously, they're close together, but it's not a solid line, because it needs to let waste material out and it needs to let nutrients in. So they're close together and can close out certain particles of a certain size that it doesn't want to come in, and it can let in things that it wants to let out and let it come in. So it's reactive. It's not solid, even though when it's depicted, when we see it here, depicted, it doesn't give the impression of that the line itself is not solid. Understood? It's not giving you the impression that actually there's parts close together. It gives the impression of solidity, as this doesn't give the impression that the protons, for example, within the nucleus are moving in a direction. They're moving in an orbital manner, the same way that the electrons are moving in an orbital manner. So one could be fooled, as I say, because the diagram being written is from the imagination of somebody's interpretation of the facts as they see it, how that diagram should be laid out. And one should always remember that it's still somebody else's mind drawing the diagram, etc., through their eyes. Yeah. So we can see, as we start to look beneath even the structure of, in this case, hydrogen, and we start to go to the subatomic level, we see, it's made up of smaller parts. So even that in itself, which was once thought to be the first element, obviously first sum, that you go beneath the surface of it, and it's made up of smaller particles or parts, understood, which is referring to as quantum physics. So here we see exactly, and we've shown this I think before, but the type of illusion that we're talking about. So it seems here curves. We see, look, it appears to be a solid block of color. In actuality, it's not even circular. It's made up of small squares called pixels. Understand? And what we're interested in for the purposes of natural ether energy, we're interested in this. That space which is in between. So even at this level, it's not solid, is it? They're close together. They're not solid. They're not linked, boom, straight, you know what I mean, against each other where you can't see anything between them. There's a space between them. But from the perspective that we're looking at, we can't see that space. Understood? Same we see here, I'm showing this again a few times before, that this image from a certain perspective shows, again, this picture, I suppose, of a peacock. And for all intents and purposes, it looks solid, it's got shape or whatever. Not seeing that, say, it's made up of small squares, even though you've got curvature shape, highly detailed. Obviously, if this was a bit clearer, highly detailed. But again, we've got this space in between the lines. We look at, for example, up at the so-called night sky, and we look at the Orion star constellation. And when we talk about constellations, we know that the word constellation ties into the fact of star configurations that make a picture. And so we look at it in a certain way as a result of that. But the reality of the situation, that is how it looks from a person standing on the planet Earth looking upwards. Yes, so we might say, okay, Orion, yeah, that's a 6 major star configuration. But when we got, and then it's got, obviously, it can be, they've drawn, obviously, anthropomorphically, they've drawn a human being, in the case of ancient Egypt, of a Sar, over that body, yeah, to align itself with the different parts of the human body, the makeup of the human body. But the reality of the situation is, if we was to go further, we wouldn't see that nice picture, you understand, 7-star or whatever configuration picture, the 4 outer stars and then the 3 of Orion's belt in the middle. You understand? When we get closer to it, it's going to change. It's going to see hundreds of millions of different objects, stars or whatever. The very image that we had would see it's not real. Only looks that way from a certain perspective. And so this is what is being expressed, or that we have to understand, that when we're looking at the material world, understood, that now we've got to kind of we're looking at what is manifest, but we're looking what isn't manifest. So we're interested in the space between things as well as what is within the environment. And so to get an understanding of that, the master teacher gives us a formula to understand, well, actually, to get an atom itself, as it's been expressed, is mostly empty space. And in order to understand or get this image of, well, how much space is in the atom, what we do is we blow up the nucleus to the size of the sun, understood? And then we times it by the diameter of the solar system to get a sense, as if we blew this atom up to that sort of size, of how much space would be within that atom. Yeah, and we end up with a number here of 135 billion miles wide. So if we blew up the nucleus of that atom that we were just looking at the diagram, which is considered to be the smallest thing in physical existence, according to what they teach, then blew up to the size of the sun, this is how wide, understood, that atom would be. 135.5 billion miles. So basically, the reason why for the secondary number is because what do you call it? Pluto, yes, was declassified as a planet, isn't it? So if you classified Pluto as a planet which is not under the sun's control now, then you would go to Pluto, and that's where you get the larger number. But if we go it from the solar system as it's configured now, then we have to take it from Neptune. So 135.5 billion miles. That is a tremendous. So what it is, there's a lot of space in space. Space is mostly empty space. Excuse me, space is mostly space, which we perceive to be empty, but it is not empty. Understood? Because that's what we describe space. If you said somebody an empty room, how much space have you got? You're talking about empty space. It's empty from a perspective of, it might not be full if you're talking about a room in a house or something. It's not full of furniture, or it's not full of what we call things, but it is full of things. It's full of things which we're paying little or no attention to. And so you have to understand our senses are wired in to the material world. And now we obviously have to step back to understand what else is out there, or the world of energy. So one of the, in our understanding, so one of the parts that we need to understand is a bit about ether. And so it's about ethers. And one of the aspects, or which will help or aid our understanding of ether, is that ether, one aspect, one of the characteristics of ether is that it is able to form a medium to allow different types of energy to travel. Understood? So if we think about some of the technology that we have in our house right now, we can see that you have many appliances and different things that are connected by a wire. So, I don't know, for example, to get power, it's plugged into a wall and there's a physical wire. But you talk about wireless technology. So maybe your internet you're using the wireless internet. You're using things like a remote control where there's no wire between the two different devices. So there are things in the house that are able to communicate with each other, or allow a transference of energy of a type between each other, but there's no physical medium as you can see it. Understood? But different types of ether allow movement and motion, understood, or allow different energies to travel from obviously one place to another. So wireless is the physical wire is removed, but there is still a medium, understood, that allows or is required for particles to move from one location, seemingly, to another location. Understood? And that is one of the roles of ethers. even though you can't see it, or in that regard. You have an etheric umbilical cord, the same way that you once had a physical umbilical cord. Yes, which allows us, say, a two-way communication. So it allows us to receive information in, but also allows us to send out information insofar as controlling how some of the involuntary and voluntary systems work within the human body. As I say, we had to do everything from a voluntary or a conscious perspective, we would be dead. Yeah, because we wouldn't be able to make decisions fast enough necessary to sustain all of the trillions of transactions, as I say, and activities which are going on within your physical structure right now, on the amazement of it. Yeah. So let's say here, electromagnetic energy can be envisioned as traversing Paa Pau'ut ethers in the form of bullets or clusters called quantum particles. Yeah. So that's that part of that energy in motion. Now, one of the things that we have to get into our heads and understand conceptually is that energy had a birth. So before we have energy, we have something referred to as basic energy. You understand? And here it's describing that the entire universe is permeated with a basic energy of a rarefied concentration compared to the energy bundles which comprise of atoms, matter, and then quantum particles, subatomic quarks, biapsials, so on and so forth. So let's look at some of the wording here. So basic comes from the word base, so we need to understand what that means. And then rarefied, you see here, having low density, rare gases, light-headed, rarefied mountain air. Secondly, interesting enough, of high moral or intellectual value, elevated in nature or style, and exalted ideal. So we were talking previously, if you remember, about ethics, understood, yeah, and its relationship to emotions, emotional energy, understood, and how, I suppose, that energy can be ordered or worked through by way of certain principles ethically. And in Holy Tablets, chapter 1, on the very first page, remember, it talks about 9 ether beings being conscious and conscience gases. Understood? So within the system, inherently certain rules have been built in, so it functions independent of judgment. It's about a reactionary state and how those rules get triggered by certain types of actions. But then it's created by beings who had a conscience, or who have conscience or are conscious, seeing outside, that then built the system to enable those rules to come into and maintain them now, those rules to enact, come into fruition, so on and so forth, which govern new life forms, so on and so forth, as they come into the environment. Yeah, so there's a link to ethics and emotions. So let's look at the meaning. So interesting enough, when you look at gas, from their perspective, it ties into the Greek word chaos, meaning empty space. Now, this is interesting because obviously, as we can see when we're looking out at this so-called empty space, is blackness. And to us, that blackness or black state is supreme balancement. Let me just show this up. Yeah, so that's that supreme balancement. Yeah, so we understand about primordial chaos, and we understand about within that space, and we understand about order. Understood? And again, order and chaos are not equal in nature. But to them, the issue is, I suppose, is an issue, but they're looking at that blackness, for their lack of understanding, as chaotic. Understood? Whereas we, as ancient Africans, ancient Tamarians, you understand, ancient Egyptians, we're looking at it as light is chaos. Yeah, the world of some things, the world of light is chaos. as opposed to the world of things. So there's an opposing view. There's an inherent bias in the meaning of some of the language, etc., and the meanings that sit behind it because of who's talking and how the words are used. So it's important, as I say, as we step through this, you have to understand that we are looking at things and our definitions from a Wu-Sabat perspective, not from the Caucasian perspective. Certain times we have to utilize it to aid our study or learning or whatever, and you may refer to that, I suppose, in a sense, certainly when we're dealing with the religion stuff, as theosophy. But we deal with facts. Yeah, and some of us, because we've come from a certain place or perspective, or as we said earlier, most of us from the hood have been hoodwinked, because that's where the place where people get hoodwinked, in the neighborhood, or they shorten it for hood, where we get fooled and tricked. You understand? That's why they say, in some movie they showed there was a church and a liquor store on every corner. So this is where a person gets hood, the place where the hood is where we get hoodwinked. Yeah, we get fooled and tricked. So, right, so let's move through. As I've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to a certain point in the class. So chaos, again, gapping, void, empty, immeasurable space. So again, as I say, highlighting how they perceive, isn't it, this blackness? Yeah. The confused, formless, elementary state of the universe, the Greek for disorder, so on and so forth. And as I say, within that emptiness, we know there is primordial order and primordial chaos. Understood? Not, I say, equal in nature or activity. So basic relates to base. And what do we see with base? Simply understand, we see bottom, foundation, pedestal. Yeah, to place on a foundation. We see, interesting enough, yeah, that base metals are worthless in contrast to noble or precious metals. So again, you can see inherently, yes, in the language, that the environment where the shiny things, the things that can be detectable, come from, they place no value on it. Understood? They place the value on the result, not from what grew the result. Yes? The same way in this society today, we don't place sufficient value on the darkness, i.e. the woman, the womb of the woman, and the woman who shaped us within that environment. We don't place value on that role. We place value on the outcome. We give succession rights to the he, the son. Yeah, not to the darkness that gave birth to the son. No, they do. Not in our culture. It was matriarchal. So we give credence to both. Succession can't take place unless you have a female or a daughter in your lineage. So this is how you see in the language how the thinking behind it becomes important, because their adverse thinking, their opposition thinking, their anti-nature thinking, their hate comes through in the way in which they define certain words. Which is why it makes the language of Misbatia important, because if we get back to a place where we're thinking about what these words mean in the language where it came from, or where it was birthed from, where the ideas or the concepts were birthed within that type of tonation. So you can see how difficult it is for the master teacher to have patience to be expressing things in a language which is anti-us, in tones which are anti-us. Now, so energy we touched upon earlier, a force of expression. Now, what is basic energy? So we have to understand this. It's saying, well, you're going to have a hard time conceiving of basic energy with the same overstanding associated with energy, because basic type has not motion and cannot impart force. Yes, so we associate energy with movement, isn't it? Yeah, so energy with work, which again, movement, motion. We associate energy with power. Again, denoting force. Yeah, but the foundation of it does none of those things. But it's still energy. 27. It is quiescent, passive, imperceptible. It is the mother of energy and matter. It is that from which all things are created. So there's a state before energy that creates things, even before we get to some things or the sum of things. And it's feminine. 28. And she's revealed to you by evidence of existing of the wave phenomena of the propagation of Nawur, light, and the moods of vibrations of the three colors, blue, yellow, and red, which birth all others. By this we know she is Paa Pau'ut, the existence. So remember, we were teaching that light moves in what? Excuse me, energy moves in what? Straight lines, and matter moves in orbits, correct? As well as the particles spinning. Yeah, but it moves in orbits. That's a differential characteristic between the two. So if energy moves, then how is it in waveform? Because something is impacting the straight line movement. Yes, causing it to vibrate or move in waves. Yeah, because being impacted or affected by it. It's also controlling the speed of certain particles. So light cannot exceed 186, 272 miles per second. The speed is controlled irrespective of the source of or force of power imparted upon the particle at source to cause it to move in the first place. It will only reach and not exceed a speed of 186, 272 miles per second. So something is controlling that. Something is controlling, as it's been expressed here, the fact that blue, and we see it, is a particle moving at a certain speed. Yellow, same. Red, same. Moving in darkness. Blue being the fastest of those particles moving in darkness. Red being the slowest. Understood? So when you're driving your car, for example, as I say, and certain times, depending on the surface of the road, you get that feeding, isn't it? You can get feedback of that in the steering wheel. You understand? Coming from the vibration through the tires, the suspension, so on and so forth. But you get that feedback, depending on how good your car is, maybe. But you can get that feedback back through the steering wheel. You understand? Even though your car is seeking to travel, I suppose, depending on the surface of the road, it's seeking to travel in a quite straight or horizontal-ish line, depending on the gradient of the road. Understood? But you're going to get vibration based on the surface that is moving across. And so something is impacting light to cause energy which moves in straight lines to move in waves. This is this phenomena known as basic energy. So basic energy, listen now, or ether. So it's basic energy now is being called ether, imposes a limit on the speed of Nawur, light. And it's all within dark matter. So space is not empty, as we've been reiterating to all of you on the call today. It says, now dark matter, Paa Pau'ut, just is, was, and will be. And so some of these terms we're going to be making plain as we step through. Dark matter is stationary. Within it is the movement of things. All things. So things move in dark matter, but there's this basic energy or state where things do not move. Within it, light is shaped, light bends and moves. It is called unseen, yet it exists, as we've expressed earlier. It is perceived, but it's not seen. That's why they say dark. Dark matter does not push or pull. Certain life forms here, neutrinos, only exist in dark matter. Dark matter is nothingness. That is the sum of all. So nothingness. No thingness. Not non-existing. That there's just the things don't sum up to something can be weighed, but it collectively is referred to as all together. And it says everything does not have to be something, because a thing must come forth of nothing. And we just saw, obviously, in basic energy gave birth to what? Gave birth to things, understand, and energy, correct? Understand? So energy and matter, yes, all things are created from basic energy. Yeah, so from this state or force that does not have the characteristics of energy as we know it. Yeah, because a thing must come forth of nothing. So a thing has a certain type of birth. Yeah, and so when things are being described, and when some things are being described, we have to read a bit more slowly and pay a bit more attention to how things are being expressed, because it all has a certain type of meaning correlated to it. So this is a sort of diagram that they talk about in terms of visible dark matter, to see how things have obviously evolved in one sense from a single point or a singularity, Big Bang in this particular case, and how there are a number of different energies that were expressed out of incidents like this, but were not seen, but could be felt vibrationally, understood. And as they slowed down in vibration, and as they transitioned or transformed from the world of things to the world of some things, yeah, or from energy to matter, then they become, in certain instances, become detectable. Yeah, when there's movement and motion out of this basic state. So, as I said, we talked about, I think, the limits against light energy, certainly within that environment, and how the environment puts some brakes on it, or basic energy, feminine in essence, puts a brake on those particles. And as I say, as you can see here, they all travel at the same speed, in the same irrespective of how much energy they retain or hold. Now, interesting enough, this next statement says the weapons are analogous to the way air is a carrier of sound vibrations. So this is a particularly powerful statement, because it's saying here that basically Nagaru or Negroids or Musbatu Sabians can be compared to the way in which air is the medium for sound. And we talked about ether being a medium to allow the transfer of energy. That's one of its characteristics. You see, air is a type of ether, or certainly associated with ether, and it's a carrier. You put your fingers in your ears, you can't hear anything because you've created a vacuum. Understood? So there's no air there for you to hear the sound waves that are being obviously carried to your eardrum from whatever external source. So we understand this, but it's saying that we, as a people, are of that similar characteristic, an aspect of us, or aspects of us. We are that. We are a medium in that way, as ether. Or we have an etheric aspect of ourself, isn't it? Paa Pau'ut, the etheric self, which obviously works with the ka'a, and the Ba'ah, you understand, as well as the other 6 principles. But those primary ones, obviously, of our higher self working in unison or triad with each other. Now, basic energy permeating space is a fluid carrier of the quantum particles. So again, ether is carrying, and we're going to get more into this in part 2, but it's a medium, isn't it? It's carrying energy, or allows the transference of energy from one place to another. It's essential. It can't happen without it. There is no motion or movement without basic energy, even though basic energy does not move, does not impart force. Motion exists within that medium. And what do they say of ahah or ether? Substance or fluid that fills all space, colorless, volatile liquid, using anthetics, ethereal, light, airy, heavenly, ethereality. So they've given a certain definition, even they know something exists, which has been given some expression around it, but it's not really taught. Not taught there, because, as I say, many of the things that relate to it pertain to us, but it doesn't pertain to their development, growth, or who they're supposed to grow into in that regard, because they don't have that soul, that connective force. Understood? They don't have a relationship to the blackness or to the space that we're making reference to. That's why they emphasize the light, which is really for them fire, which they worship, through the Zoroastrianism, understood, which gave birth to Wiccanism, gave birth to the monotheistic religions that we see today, all based on fire worship. So ether, you see it described in various different ways: upper regions of space, directed from ether, the upper, pure, bright air. So you made that correlation slightly earlier. Pure air, Athenian, to burn, shine, and to burn, linked to the word edifice. So in their understanding, it was an element that filled space in the same, so outer space as we would have it, and considered to be a purer form of air, or the 5th element, some referred to it as or considered it to be, and it seemed to be a frame reference to the forces in the universe, perhaps without material properties. So space, or this, or what we call in space, is not empty but filled with this substance called ether, according to their various different definitions, in the sand, as they have it. So we talked about, I think we've expressed this, so let's go back over that again, about why energy was supposed to be moving straight, is now moving in a wave-like fashion, and how that relates to the female, you understand? And so how that basic energy is associated with, as I say, the birth of matter and energy, come from that world of nothing into things. Now, which then become some things. So, obviously that matriarchal aspect is to show, and why our systems were in correlation with that, because that's natural. That's the natural system. Anything other than that is irreality. It's myth. It's legend. Understood? For how nature's design works every time, unless you see unnatural things taking place with people trying to mess, surgeons, various other people messing with the, or trying to go against the natural order or rules of things. Yeah. So we are living our womb in liquid until we are reborn in air, which obviously is, and in this particular planet, is a lesser or more dense form of liquid. So we're breathing in water vapor. And it says bolts are ether and of quantum particles. You understand? Now I'm going to finish on this slide. So, and we're going to get into some detail. We're going to look into Paa Pau'ut in the next class in some great detail. But in order to do that, we need to understand certain terminologies. So like what is, when you say all is, what does is mean? What does of mean in our culture? What does are mean? When we say all is, I am, what does is mean? And what does am mean? Because we're saying it in this Paa Pau'ut, all is, I am. What does alone mean? Because in the monotheistic religions, they talk about their Most High, God, there's different terminology, being alone. And Tahuti, or the Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, in the form of the master teacher, pointed out many years ago to us, well, if God is alone and has no partners, then what part do you play as the person there making the declaration? By the virtue of the fact that you're there making the declaration, you basically contradict that statement. Unless you are that God that you're speaking about. Because they don't know that alone, or the hidden meaning behind it, is not alone, but rather all one. And then what does one mean? Because we're saying one, and it's spelled O-N-E, but then in English, it's spelled W-O-N-E. So what's the one talking about? And what does that relate to? In here, though, what we're interested in this diagram is look at the ether between these different planes of existence. So it's the backdrop, you understand? It's the foundation, it's the base, understood, which we're now going into and we're interested in, that we're delving into, which we are a part of. We're not separated from it. We're not different from it. We're not within it. We are a part of, and it is a part of us. I'm going to get into that in some detail. Because in us, part can be whole, and whole can be part. How does that make sense? I'm going to explain that in part 2 of this class, Natural Ether Energy. Any questions before we close out today? Seems everybody's been a bit quiet today, no problem.
Yeah, they really have been quiet. There are no questions.
No more questions today. Okay, well, hopefully you've got a few things out of this class of certain principles. So I'm going to retest that with a short quiz at the start of the next class. And then, as I say, we're going to get into, explain some of these things and then go into what we're talking about with the different types of natural ether energy. So we've got a lot of things to cover. And so as you can see from what we're looking at there, that we're going to get into and make this nice and clear and see basically how wondrous, maybe the better way to describe it, we are as a people. I think they're pretty amazed or shocked in terms of what our ancestors have enabled us to do inherently. We're just not confident in ourselves. And so therefore are not enacting the very powers that we've been blessed with by Panatharu within the system of natural nature. It's been optimized. Certainly this planet was optimized for our existence. And so the master teacher has made many sacrifices, and so it's still incarcerated today to bring this information to us. That was a major success in them trying to stop us over that 400 years, creating that Negro, to try and get within our genetics and our genes that we would not be open to receiving this actual facts, the hereafter into the thereafter information, and embracing it. But it's not just enough to embrace it. We must acknowledge, accept it, confirm it, and implement it, and continue our growth. Because if not, we're dead. So we're going to finish off what is ether, then deal with the different types of ether, and that's where we're really going to start to delve into the natural ether energy. We're going to cover some of the other types of ether, and then we're going to look at some of the, as I say, Safaf as it pertains to our story and how you can read it and better understand some of these symbols and the type of story that it's telling you, because it's all the same story, but you need to understand some of that symbolism. So I trust it's been useful for you today. Appreciate you let's say join us on the third Sunday. Let's say it's a different schedule for October than we're used to. So the next class is next Sunday, and then we've got one the Sunday after. So effectively, it'll be 3 weeks in a row as opposed to fortnightly. And then we get into November, it will go back to fortnightly. So you've got the benefit of 3 classes in a row. So let your people know. Please let people know about this particular class on this platform. I say for those who want ethics, email us at alliesandegyptmn@aol.com. For those who want those sent out to them for further study if you don't have them. My name is Nabab Katnihes. Your facilitator today has been Harar M. Habab, Jadefri Hatap. So thank you all for attending. The recording of this will be up on YouTube at some point this week. And if you want to get back on some of our previous classes, so check us out on YouTube, All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and North. Just do a search on that to find the previous classes that have been delivered, I say, under this particular platform. Okay. Okay, well, take care all. Have a great, have a strong week. Seems like a contradiction, isn't it? Yeah, because the word weak denotes weakness. But yeah, have a strong week. Stay safe and wishing everybody blessings and positive energy. Take care.